Chapter 524. Hearing the woman's words, the beautiful middle-aged woman was quite confused. Miss, however, the woman shook her head. There's no need to say anything else. With that, she turned and left. The beautiful woman smiled bitterly. Young Miss the old man suddenly said. That young man is very strong. The beautiful woman looked at the old man. How strong is he? The old man said. If he attacks, then besides young miss, no one in our heavenly treasures chamber of commerce can stop him. The beautiful woman was shocked. How is that possible? The old man sighed and didn't say anything before turning and leaving. The woman arrived outside the chamber of commerce and sat down on a stone bench. It didn't take long for two old men to appear behind her. The woman said softly, Uncles, I'll have to trouble you two to take care of Yi Xian's little sister. The two old men nodded, and then they turned and vanished. The woman said, Young Master Yi, come out. As soon as she finished speaking, Yi Xian appeared nearby. Yi Xian walked over to the woman and smiled. Young miss, you're amazing. The woman said softly, Young Master Yi's concealment technique is amazing as well. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. I still haven't satisfied you. The woman said, Young Master Yi, are you worried that I'm plotting something? Yi Xian nodded. I'm indeed worried about you helping me without any conditions. The woman smiled. Young Master Yi's worries are reasonable. However, I can tell young Master Yi that compared to young Master Yi's immortal crystals, I value young Master Yi's favor more. Yi Xian looked at the woman. Thank you for thinking so highly of me. As he spoke, he hesitated for a moment before saying, I want to buy some swords from you. It's best if they're immortal artifacts. The woman said, How many? Yi Xian thought about it and said, 20. The woman pondered for a moment before saying, Young Master Yi doesn't have enough money. Yi Xian smiled embarrassedly. Is 5 million immortal crystals not enough? The woman shook her head. Treasures like immortal artifacts are very useful to creation realm experts. This was because if a creation realm expert had a celestial artifact, his strength would increase by at least 30%. As for the sword that young Master Yi wanted, it was one of the more precious immortal weapons. Even my Tongbao Chamber of Commerce would find it difficult to gather 20 immortal level swords in such a short time. Yi Xian's face sank. Meanwhile, the woman continued. However, I can help young master gather them. Moreover, I can even allow young master to pay on credit. Yi Xian looked at the woman. Miss, what are your conditions? The woman said softly. I want to see that treasure on young master. Yi Xian was stunned for a moment before he smiled and said, It's that simple? The woman nodded. Yi Xian grinned, and then he withdrew the pagoda. When she saw the Xiaota in front of Yi Xian, her expression changed slightly. After a short moment she said, Young Master Yi, is there a separate space within the pagoda? Yi Xian nodded. The woman asked again, Can I go in and take a look? As she spoke she said, I was being rude. Yi Xian smiled and said, There's nothing rude about it. If Miss wants to go in and take a look, you can go now. As he spoke he directly sent the woman into the pagoda. On the first floor of the pagoda, the woman looked around curiously. Not far in front of her was Xiaoling was looking at the woman curiously. The woman said softly, No wonder. Beside the woman, Yi Xian asked, What is it? The woman shook her head slightly. This item is really extraordinary. No wonder so many people want to obtain it. Yi Xian smiled and said, Miss, you don't want it? The woman shook her head. If such a treasure falls into my hands, it will be a disaster for me. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. To me it is a disaster. The woman smiled and said, Then why does young Master Yi still keep it by his side? Yi Xian smiled bitterly. I can't chase it away even if I want to. The woman nodded and did not ask any more questions. She looked at Xiaoling and said softly, She should be the spirit of origin. Yi Xian looked at the woman with some surprise. This woman was not simple. At this time, Xiaoling took out a fruit and handed it to the woman. The woman smiled and said, Thank you. As she spoke she put the fruit away. She hesitated for a moment, then took out a jade pendant and handed it to Xiaoling. This item should be useful to you. Xiaoling took the jade pendant. The jade pendant immediately emitted a white light and entered between Xiao Linger's eyebrows. Yi Xian asked, "Miss, this is?" The woman said softly, "Young Master Yi, don't worry. This item is a spirit-locking jade pendant. It can lock her own spiritual qi and prevent it from leaking out. In this way, her spiritual qi will not be wasted." "I see." Yi Xian looked at Xiaoling and said with a smile, "Hurry and thank Big Sister." Xiaoling looked at the woman and said in a clear voice, "Thank Big Sister." The woman gently rubbed Xiaoling and looked at Yi Xian. "Let's go out." Yi Xian nodded and left the prison pagoda with the woman. Outside the prison pagoda, Yi Xian looked at the woman. "Miss Baiji." The woman said softly, "Young Master Yi can call me Baiji." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Miss Baiji, I'll have to trouble you with the flying sword." After saying that, he flicked his finger, and a storage ring landed in front of Baiji. Baiji put away the storage ring. "Young Master Yi, come find me here in 3 days." Yi Xian nodded. "Thank you very much. I still have something to do, so I'll take my leave first." After saying that, he turned around to leave. At this moment, Baiji suddenly said, "Young Master Yi." Yi Xian stopped and turned to look at Baiji. The latter asked, "Young Master Yi, why do you trust me so much?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "A straightforward person doesn't beat around the bush. I want to be friends with Mississippi." Baiji nodded slightly. "Then we're friends." Yi Xian quickly said, "Then how much discount can I get when I buy things in the future?" Baiji was slightly stunned, then shook her head and smiled. "Is that your goal?" Yi Xian laughed, turned around and disappeared. Baiji chuckled. "What an interesting guy." As she said that, a scroll appeared on the stone table in front of her. The scroll recorded everything about Yi Xian. Naturally, she wouldn't help Yi Xian for no reason. After all, if she helped an ingrate, it would be too disgusting. At this moment, the beautiful woman from before appeared behind Baiji. She looked in the direction where Yi Xian left. "Miss," Baiji said softly, "grandfather's time is coming to an end. Many forces are already rolling up their sleeves. If anything happens to grandfather, they will immediately attack our treasure trade union." The beautiful woman said solemnly, "We can ask Wu Yuan and Sword Sect for help. Or others." Baiji shook her head. "The weak will not have a good ending if they seek help from the strong." After saying that, she got up and left. After Yi Xian left the treasure trade union, he returned to Sword Sect. As soon as he returned to the Sword Sect, a young man appeared in front of him. The young man sized up Yi Xian. "You're Yi Xian?" Yi Xian nodded. The young man said, "I'm from Wu Yuan." Yi Xian said indifferently, "What's the matter?" The young man sneered. "You killed people in my Wu Yuan. Do you really think I—" At this moment, a flying sword suddenly appeared between the young man's eyebrows. The young man's body stiffened, not daring to move, for fear that his head would be hit by the sword. Yi Xian walked in front of the young man. "What do you think you are?" The young man said angrily, "Yi Xian, do you think I—" Suddenly, the sword pierced half an inch into the young man's eyebrows, and a stream of blood spurted out. The young man quickly said, I just came to take a look, nothing else." Yi Xian nodded. "You came to take a look. Did you not bring a gift?" The young man. Yi Xian asked again, "No gift?" The young man quickly said, Yes, yes." As he said, he quickly took off his storage ring and handed it to Yi Xian. Yi Xian glanced at the storage ring. There were more than 3 million purple origin crystals in the storage ring. It could be considered a small fortune. Yi Xian put away the storage ring and said with a smile, "Brother, it's fine to come, but you gave me such a big gift. Sai, you're really too polite." The young man's smile was extremely unnatural. "It's my duty, it's my duty." Yi Xian put away his sword and said with a smile, "Come and take a look in the future." After saying that, he walked to the side. The young man immediately heaved a sigh of relief. The next moment, he turned around and ran. When the young man returned to Wu Yuan, his face was already covered in blood. In front of the statue in Wu Yuan, all the Wu Yuan disciples surrounded the young man, and the young man said somewhat crazily, "That Yi Xian has gone too far. Not only did he humiliate me, But he also said that there's no one in Wuyuan capable of defeating us every time he sees Wuyuan disciples in the future. Hearing the young man's words, all the people present were instantly enraged, and someone said angrily, "Who does that Yi Xian think he is? How dare he humiliate Wuyuan like this? Guofei, did you go to look for Yi Xian yourself, and then you suffered a loss, so you're inciting everyone now? T. Have you forgotten that Yi Xian killed people in Wuyuan? Now the disciples of the sword sect are laughing at Wuyuan, saying that the disciples of Wuyuan are all cowards. That's right. Now the disciples of sword sect in Wuyuan have to lower their heads when we see them. It's so King frustrating. Kill Yi Xian." At this moment someone said. The surroundings suddenly fell silent. But in the next moment countless people suddenly roared furiously, "Kill Yi Xian! Do all of you want to kill me?" Suddenly, a voice resounded from the side. Everyone looked over and saw a man standing not too far away. It was Yi Xian. The expression of the young man who had run back earlier instantly changed when he saw Yi Xian, and he retreated repeatedly. Yi Xian glanced at them and smiled. "Do all of you want to kill me?" One of the disciples of Wuyuan stood out and glared angrily at Yi Xian. "So what if I do?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "Do all of you want to gang up on me or fight me one-on-one?" The disciple of Wuyuan spoke furiously. "Do we need to gang up on you? You." He hadn't finished speaking when a sword was suddenly pressed against the center of his forehead. The man's voice stopped abruptly. The surroundings instantly fell silent. Yi Xian glanced at the crowd and said, "My sister is in Wuyuan, and so are my friends in Wuyuan. To be honest, I don't want anything unpleasant to happen between me and Wuyuan." As he spoke, he looked up at the martial arts hall and said, "One person from Wuyuan will fight me one-on-one. Let's settle the scores in one battle. What do you think?" After a moment of silence, a voice suddenly resounded from the martial arts hall. "Sure." As the voice resounded, a figure appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian was stunned when he saw this figure. "You." Chapter 525. Of course Yi Xian knew this guy. Emosia of the Moat clan. Seeing Yi Xian, Emosia was stunned. "You." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He did not expect Emosia to join Wuyuan. Emosia smiled and said, "Brother Yi, you came to Divine Martial City too." Yi Xian nodded. Emosia was about to speak, but soon, he seemed to have thought of something and frowned. "Brother Yi." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Let's exchange a few moves." Emosia glanced at Yi Xian and smiled. Sure. Both Yi Xian and Emosia wanted to compete with each other. They wanted to have a good fight when they were in Neverending Starfield. Unfortunately, they did not have the chance. But now they had the chance. Fight. The two of them came to an arena in Wuyuan. The arena was huge, hundreds of feet wide. The entire arena was supported by an array that could withstand powerful forces. Some disciples of Wuyuan gathered around the arena. On the arena, Emosia looked at Yi Xian and said, "Brother Yi, be careful." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly disappeared. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly attacked with his sword. A cold light appeared and the space cracked. Rumble. The entire arena suddenly shook violently. The two of them retreated instantly. In the process of retreating, two flying swords appeared in front of Emosia. At this moment, Emosia's body suddenly became illusory. Chi. The two flying swords slashed across, but they hit the air. At this time, Emosia had already rushed in front of Yi Xian. However, he was greeted by a dot of sword light. Emosia punched. Force against force. Boom. As Emosia punched, Yi Xian's dot of sword light instantly shattered. At the same time, a fist went straight for Yi Xian's face. However, the fist instantly retracted, because a flying sword had appeared at the back of Emosia's head. Emosia retracted his fist, turned around and punched again. Bang! Yi Xian's flying sword was forced to a stop. At this time, Emosia's expression changed. He turned around and suddenly closed his hands. This time, it directly merged into a single sword. Yi Xian suddenly twisted his right hand, but the sword did not move at all. Emosia's expression changed. He lightly stomped his right foot and flashed dozens of feet to the right. Emosia's expression slightly changed. His right foot lightly stomped on the ground, and he dodged 100 feet to the right. However, before he could stop, the two flying swords slashed at him again. The flying swords were so fast that Emosia did not dare to be careless. He did not dare to be careless. He dodged backward again. He dodged backward again and dodged Xian's flying swords. Yi Xian was about to attack again, but Emosia suddenly disappeared. Emosia suddenly pulled out his sword and stabbed it to the right. Boom! The entire martial arts stage shook violently. In the next moment, two afterimages and two flying swords flashed across the martial arts stage. When the disciples of the martial institution saw this, they trembled in fear. Yi Xian and Emosia were too fast. They were so fast that they could not see them clearly, especially Yi Xian's flying sword. The speed of this flying sword was extraordinarily terrifying, if it was used for a sneak attack. Thinking of this, many people felt their scalps tingle. In front of the martial arts hall, Wu Yuan's dean, He Liantian, quietly looked at Yi Xian and Emosia. Behind him was Qin Shan. Qin Shan's expression was a little heavy. A moment later, He Liantian suddenly said, "How is it?" Qin Shan said in a deep voice, "Both of them are very strong." He Liantian smiled. "I didn't expect so many geniuses to come to the never-ending star region this time. Shaoan, Lian Wanli, Yi Ling, and Emosia are all geniuses among geniuses." Hearing that, Qin Shan's solemn face also revealed a trace of a smile. "Not bad indeed." He Liantian shook his head. "Not bad. These monsters are rarely seen in 100 years. Qin Shan wanted to say something but stopped. He Liantian Tendo said, "Speak." Qin Shan said, "Dean, there are so many monsters." He Liantian said softly, "Are you afraid that they will cause internal strife?" Qin Shan nodded. "None of them will submit to anyone, especially now that there are two factions in the Institute. One is the never-ending faction led by the never-ending Starfield, which is in Lanxiu, and the others. All the people from the never-ending Starfield have gathered around them. The other is the original geniuses of our Wu Yuan, which is Changhe and the others. Because of Yi Xian, the relationship between these two factions is not very good." He Liantian was silent. Qin Shan said again, "Also Shaoan and the others are too close to Yi Xian, and our Wu Yuan and the Sword Sect." He Liantian said with a smile. "Then what do you think we should do?" Qin Shan was silent. He Liantian raised his head to look at the horizon, and he said softly, "You should know the relationship between our academy and the Sword Sect. We can compete with each other and even fight each other, but we can never kill each other." "Why?" Qin Shan was puzzled. He Liantian looked at the statue below. "There are two reasons. First, it is because of the ancestral master. When the ancestral master left, he left a message saying that he and the Sword Sect will be on good terms for generations. Second, whether it is the Sword Sect or our Wu Yuan, both have their own trump cards. Unless there is a huge gap, neither of us dares to touch the other." Qin Shan said, "The one from the Sword Sect is very ambitious." He Liantian said with a smile, "I know." Qin Shan looked at He Liantian. "Isn't the dean worried?" He Liantian said softly, "I want to see if the Sword Sect dares to touch our Wu Yuan." Qin Shan looked at Yi Xian and Emosia. "If our Wu Yuan and the Sword Sect fight, this Yi Xian and Shaoan," He Liantian said with a smile, "look at it the other way around." The sword light dispersed, and the man retreated repeatedly. The man hadn't even stopped when two flying swords were pressed against the center of his forehead. The surroundings were perfectly silent. Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings. "The enmity between me and Wu Yuan ends here." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Everyone in the surroundings was silent. After Yi Xian left Wu Yuan, he returned to the Sword Sect, and he'd just returned to the cottage where Yu Wuchen resided when a man appeared before him. The man wore a gray robe and a sword on his waist. The man sized up Yi Xian. "You're Yi Xian who just joined my Sword Sect?" Yi Xian nodded. "You are?" The man said, "I'm one of the 6 swords of the Sword Sect, Broken Sword." "Broken Sword." Yi Xian was slightly stunned, and then he said, "I've heard a lot about you." Broken Sword nodded. "I heard you killed someone in Wu Yuan." Yi Xian was about to speak when Broken Sword spoke abruptly. "Well done." Yi Xian was speechless. Broken Sword continued, Are you interested in going to Endless City? Endless City? Yi Xian frowned slightly. Where? Broken Sword said. A desolate starfield. There's a city there called Endless City, and there are unique devil beasts there. You can obtain devil crystals by killing those unique devil beasts. Yi Xian shook his head. I have something to do, so I won't be going. Broken Sword tapped with his finger, and a sword of command descended before Yi Xian. If you encounter disciples of Wu Yuan besieging you, you can send this command, and we'll rush over immediately. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the horizon. Yi Xian glanced at the sword of command in his hand, smiled, and then put it away. That broken sword from before was at the creation realm. The creation realm. Attaining the creation realm at such a young age, one had to admit that it was extremely terrifying. Right at this moment, the space before Yi Xian suddenly trembled, and Yi Xian's expression changed slightly. In next to no time, a woman suddenly appeared before him. It was Bai Ji from Tongbao Trading Company. Yi Xian was shocked. Miss Bai? Bai Ji said in a low voice. Let's go. Yi Xian was puzzled. Miss Bai Ji, what do you mean? Bai Ji said. 6 Dao Realm experts are in the sword sect now. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression instantly sank. Bai Ji said again. Let's go immediately. The sword sect will definitely compromise. They definitely will. P.S. Many of you should have seen the physical book of Sword Realm yesterday. In my opinion, it's very domineering and beautiful. Chapter 526. Sword Sect's Compromise. Yi Xian frowned. Why are you so sure, Miss Bai? Bai Ji sighed. Young Master Yi, since you joined the Sword Sect, have you met the Sword Sect's sect master? Yi Xian shook his head. Since he joined the Sword Sect, apart from Yu Wuchen, he had not met any other Sword Sect's upper echelon. Thinking of this, Yi Xian's face turned gloomy. At this moment, he also noticed that something was amiss. Bai Ji continued. The Sword Sect will definitely give up on you, because your Sword Sect's sect master is very ambitious, and he won't offend the top forces outside, especially when there's a Wu Yuan in Xinwu City. If the Sword Sect is targeted, Wu Yuan will hit them while they're down. At that time, the Sword Sect will be in a very bad situation. So the Sword Sect will definitely choose to give up on you. Yi Xian was silent. Bai Ji continued. 6 manifestation realm experts, and this is not their true strength. If you want to protect yourself and your friends, and don't want to fall out with the Sword Sect, you must leave now. If you leave now, the Sword Sect will not be too ruthless. If you don't leave, when they let you go or want to control you, you will be in a much worse situation than now. Yi Xian asked in a deep voice. If I leave, will they not target my friends? Bai Ji said softly. That will depend on Wu Yuan's attitude. If Wu Yuan is determined to protect your friends, they will not dare to act rashly. But if the one in Wu Yuan is also ambitious. At this point, she didn't continue speaking. Yi Xian said softly. Unknowingly, my situation has become so bad. At this time, Bai Ji suddenly looked to the right, and an old man appeared out of nowhere. This person was none other than Yu Wuchen. Yu Wuchen looked at Yi Xian. Let's go. Yi Xian's face darkened. Senior, Yu Wuchen said in a light voice. If you came a year earlier and were a core disciple of our sword sect, then perhaps they would protect you. But now they won't. Yi Xian was silent. Yu Wuchen sighed softly. It's not that they don't value you, but they value something else. Moreover, you're in conflict with the sect's interests. Now follow this girl, and leave the sword sect immediately. Yi Xian was about to speak, when a middle-aged man suddenly appeared here. This person was the sword sect's sect master, Li Xianfeng. Li Xianfeng looked at Yi Xian. You might not be able to leave for now. Yi Xian smiled. Are you going to hand me over? Li Xianfeng was about to speak when Yu Wuchen suddenly said. When has our sword sect ever bowed to anyone? Li Xianfeng shook his head. Martial uncle, this isn't bowing to anyone. Yu Wuchen sneered. Not bowing to anyone? Isn't handing over a disciple of your own sect considered bowing to anyone? Li Xianfeng said. He's not a disciple of our sword sect. His name has never been recorded in our sword sect's disciple register. Yu Wuchen smiled. Looks like you won't even give me face. Li Xianfeng said softly. Martial uncle, this is no small matter. If we're not careful, our sword sect will be listed as an enemy. Yu Wuchen looked at Yi Xian. Let's go. Li Xuanfeng's eyes narrowed. At this time, Yu Wuchen looked at Li Xianfeng. Do you think it's the same for the sword sect to hand him over or for him to be captured? Li Xianfeng was silent. Yu Wuchen continued. Or are you saying that you also want that treasure? If that's the case, have you thought about the consequences if you get it now? Li Xianfeng was still silent. Yu Wuchen continued. Does this kid have no background? My sword. Taking action against him now is akin to giving someone else's dowry. Li Xianfeng was silent for a moment, then looked at Yi Xian. Leave the sword sect. As for whether we'll be friends or foes in the future, it's up to fate. With that he turned and disappeared. At the same time, Li Xuanfeng's voice sounded again. Leave now. Yu Wuchen looked at Yi Xian. Let's go. Yi Xian bowed respectfully to Yu Wuchen. I'll remember seniors' help in my heart. With that he looked at Bai Ji. The latter nodded slightly and crushed a talisman. In the next moment, both of them disappeared. In the field, Yu Wuchen sighed softly. He came to the statue in front of the sword sect's basilica. Below the statue, there was a line of words. My sword sect will never compromise. Never compromise. Yu Wuchen looked at the statue in front of him. As he looked at it, his eyes became blank. No one had seen this ancestral master. No one had seen the ancestral master of Wu Yuan. All they knew was that both of them passed by this place and accepted 2 disciples here. That was how the sword sect and Wu Yuan came into being. A moment later, Yu Wuchen turned and left. In front of the sword sect's basilica, Li Xianfeng looked at the statue in the distance. Beside him stood an old man. The old man said in a deep voice, Sect Master, why did you let Yi Xian go? Li Xianfeng said indifferently, Who said I let him go? The old man was slightly stunned. In the next moment he understood. The sword sect could not openly attack Yi Xian. If they did, their reputation would be tarnished. Secondly, even if the sword sect obtained Yi Xian's treasure, they would still be the target of everyone. In the dark, the old man said in a deep voice, Sect Master, this person is strong. Li Xianfeng nodded. I know. With that he turned and left. The old man also left. On the other side in Wu Yuan, in a hall, the dean of Wu Yuan, He Liantian suddenly said softly, He's really going to make a move. Beside him, Qin Shan said in a deep voice, Against Yi Xian? He Liantian nodded. Qin Shan's face darkened. What is he thinking? He Liantian said with a smile. What else can he think? He wants to unify Shenwu City. No, his ambition is bigger. Qin Shan said in a deep voice. This person's ambition is not small, and the swordsman's combat strength is not weak. We have to be careful. In addition, Yi Xian's little sister is in Wu Yuan. Those forces might target her. Not only that, I guess the sword sect might also use this opportunity to deal with Wu Yuan. He Liantian said softly. It's not a possibility, it's a certainty. Qin Shan looked at He Liantian. How should Wu Yuan deal with it? He Liantian said in a deep voice. We can't give up on Yi Ling, Qin Shan asked. Why? He Liantian said softly. Because she is good enough. Not only that, if we give up on her, it's the same as losing Shaoan and the others. They will think that Wu Yuan is incompetent. If Wu Yuan really gives up on Yi Ling at this time, then we are really incompetent. Qin Shan said in a deep voice. But if we don't give up our situation, He Liantian said with a smile. The sword sect compromised not because they are afraid of those forces, but because the sword sect has bigger ambitions. They want a lot. And my Wu Yuan? At least I don't have such big ambitions. I only hope that Wu Yuan can continue to exist forever. Speaking up to this point, he looked at the distant sky and said softly, Ambition often means eternal damnation. From now on, you and Old One should pay more attention. Don't let outsiders touch Wu Yuan. If there are people, kill them directly. Qin Shan nodded slightly. As if thinking of something, he said again, Then Yi Xian, He Liantian said in a low voice. Whether he lives or dies, it depends on his luck. Qin Shan nodded slightly. Understood. Saying so, he turned and left. Shenwu City. Yi Xian and Bai Ji appeared at the entrance of Tongbao Chamber of Commerce. Yi Xian looked at Bai Ji. Miss Bai Ji, thank you. Bai Ji shook her head. It's nothing. Yi Xian said, farewell. Saying so, he turned and left. Bai Ji suddenly said, are you afraid of dragging me down? Yi Xian nodded. If I continue to stay here, I will definitely drag you down. Your help this time is enough. Farewell. Saying so, he turned into a sword light and soared into the sky, brazenly leaving. Obviously, he wanted to tell everyone that he, Yi Xian, had left Tongbao Chamber of Commerce. After Yi Xian left, a beautiful woman appeared behind Bai Ji. She looked at the sword light in the sky and said softly, this guy is quite interesting. Bai Ji said softly, get our men to pay attention to those forces in the dark, as well as the sword sect in Wuyuan. The beautiful woman said solemnly, Miss, do you really want to be involved in this vortex? Bai Ji nodded. There might still be hope if I take a gamble. Otherwise, once Grandpa leaves, my Tongbao Chamber of Commerce will become the meat of others. Saying so, she turned and left. Wuyuan in a certain courtyard, and Lanxiu stood in the courtyard, looking up at the sky. No one knew what she was thinking. At this moment, Lian Wanli appeared at the entrance of the courtyard. She leaned on the wall beside her and smiled. That guy was kicked out of the sword sect. And Lanxiu nodded. I know. Lian Wanli smiled. What do you think? And Lanxiu said softly, don't do anything. Lian Wanli was surprised. Why? And Lanxiu said, at this time, he will be even more terrifying if he's alone. Lian Wanli thought about it and understood. Yi Xian was a swordsman, but he was also an assassin, a super assassin. If Yi Xian was alone, then he could hide in the dark. But if they were to make a move, then they would have no choice but to force Yi Xian to show himself. At that time, it would be disadvantageous to Yi Xian instead. As if she thought of something, Lian Wanli said, his situation might not be good. And Lanxiu looked at the sky. Tell little Nine and the others not to act rashly. Lian Wanli nodded. Understood. Saying so, she turned and left. And Lanxiu looked at the sky. And no one knew what she was thinking. Outside Shenwu City, when Yi Xian left the city, he caused a huge commotion. And it could be said that he left the city openly. Moreover, this was his goal. He wanted to tell everyone that he, Yi Xian, wasn't in the Tongbao Chamber of Commerce. Not long after he left the city, numerous powerful auras enveloped him. At the same time, the surroundings suddenly darkened, and numerous black iron walls appeared around him. A formation. Yi Xian turned around, and saw an old man holding a sword standing not too far away from him. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. I never expected that the first to make a move would be the sword sect. The old man remained expressionless. How do you want to die? Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he said, I don't want to die. Chapter 527. I don't want to die. The old man's face was expressionless. I'm sorry, this old man can't satisfy you. As soon as he finished speaking, the sword in his hand suddenly left its sheath. Accompanied by a sword howl, a ray of sword light drew a beautiful arc in the sky and slashed straight at Yi Xian. This sword strike was like a bolt of lightning. Not only was it swift, but it also carried a sword aura that could destroy the heavens and the earth. And it seemed like it could split the heavens and the earth apart. Dao Realm. As soon as the old man attacked, Yi Xian's expression instantly became solemn. The sword sect actually sent a Dao Realm expert to deal with me. Yi Xian didn't dare be careless, and he charged forward swiftly and slashed down with his sword in both hands. This slash tore everything apart, and then a sharp and ear-piercing sound suddenly resounded. Bang! As soon as Yi Xian's sword slashed down, he instantly retreated explosively by over 1 kilometer. However, 2 flying swords had silently appeared in front of the old man. The old man's face was expressionless as he stabbed left and right with his sword. In an instant, the 2 swords that Yi Xian had condensed from sword insight were directly shattered and transformed into nothingness. The old man took a step forward and pointed at Yi Xian from afar. Over 1 kilometer away, the space in front of Yi Xian suddenly split open, and then a cold light appeared. Yi Xian didn't retreat but advanced instead, and he drew his sword and slashed down fiercely. Draw the sword to decide life and death. This was his strongest close combat sword technique at this moment. As soon as this sword slashed down, a sword howl instantly shook the surrounding space. When Yi Xian's sword collided with the ray of sword light, he instantly felt a powerful force spread throughout his body, and he started to retreat explosively. Moreover, he felt like his body was about to collapse at this moment. What a powerful force! After retreating 300 m, Yi Xian suddenly roared furiously, and then he suddenly stomped his right foot and raised his sword with both hands. Bang! The ray of sword light in front of him shattered, but the shattered ray of sword light blasted him back 300 m again. After he stopped, Yi Xian's entire right hand was trembling. Moreover, he felt like his internal organs were roiling. Powerful strength. Yi Xian held his sword tightly. Was this a Dao realm expert? In the distance, the old man looked at Yi Xian calmly. He did not speak, but pointed at Yi Xian through the air. The sword in his hand suddenly flew out like a bolt of lightning. The sword sliced through space and slashed towards Yi Xian. Everywhere it passed, the space within a radius of several hundred feet was annihilated. The power of this sword was enough to destroy heaven and earth. Dao realm expert. This time, Yi Xian truly witnessed what a Dao realm expert was. This was not something a blessed realm elite could compare to. Yi Xian still didn't use his trump card. This time he wanted to see his limits. Yi Xian kept the soul-suppressing sword in his hand and clasped his hands together. In an instant, many flying swords flew out. However, these flying swords were still unable to block the old man's sword. At this moment, the sword had already arrived in front of Yi Xian. Behind this sword was a long spatial rift. Yi Xian suddenly shouted angrily and stabbed with his sword. This attack didn't just contain speed and strength, it also contained sword intent. Moreover, his current sword intent wasn't on the same level as it was in the past. After being enhanced by his sword intent, the might of his attack had more than doubled. He stabbed with his sword. Bang! The space in front of Yi Xian instantly collapsed, but it returned to normal in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Yi Xian had already retreated 300 m away. As soon as he stopped, the space behind him instantly collapsed. Moreover, a wisp of blood slowly flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Meanwhile, the old man suddenly slashed down with his sword. The two flying swords that had arrived in front of him were instantly shattered. However, in the next moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared above him. Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Draw the sword to determine life and death. Draw the sword to determine life and death. That was enhanced by two types of sword intents. The sword slashed down. Bang! A ray of dazzling light erupted in front of Yi Xian, and Yi Xian was pushed over 1 kilometer back in practically an instant. However, the old man's sword had been forcefully blasted flying. After he stopped moving, Yi Xian wiped off the blood from the corner of his mouth and spoke in a slightly frenzied manner. Haha, how exciting! The old man gazed at Yi Xian. I have to say that you really are not bad. As he spoke, he opened his palm, and a sword appeared in his palm. In the next moment, monstrous sword energy appeared here. Yi Xian roared with laughter. Geezer, I think you're not bad as well. As he spoke, a powerful strand of energy suddenly appeared within him. At the same time, a dragon roar resounded. Dragon soul! Dragon energy! Yi Xian's aura instantly rose explosively, as he was enhanced by dragon soul and dragon energy. Moreover, he'd even activated Moke energy. 3 types of energy. Earlier, he'd wanted to experience his limits, so he hadn't utilized these trump cards. But now, he was going to risk his life. If he continued to conceal his trump cards, then he wouldn't be testing his limits. He would be giving his life away. The old man frowned slightly when he saw Yi Xian's aura rise explosively. In the next moment, the sword in his hand suddenly flew forward, and it was even swifter than a bolt of lightning. In the distance, Yi Xian thrust his sword out. Bang! The old man's sword was forcefully stopped by Yi Xian's sword. This time, Yi Xian had merely moved less than 3 m back. The old man's eyes instantly narrowed when he witnessed this scene. Suddenly, he raised his sword to block Chen Shi's attack. Bang! 2 flying swords slashed against the old man's sword. The old man took a few steps back, and he'd only just stopped when a few more flying swords slashed towards him. The old man frowned slightly and swung his sword forcefully. Hiss! As he slashed out with his sword, a wave of sword light surged out like a volcanic eruption. Before the flying swords could even reach him, they were directly shattered. Meanwhile, the old man's expression suddenly changed, because Yi Xian hadn't continued attacking him, and Yi Xian had turned around and destroyed the formation with a single swing of his sword. After Yi Xian had destroyed the formation with one sword strike, he was already thousands of feet away in an instant. Run! He naturally had to run because he wasn't confident in his ability to kill the old man. So, wasting time with the old man here was extremely unwise. The old man didn't pursue Yi Xian when he saw Yi Xian destroy the formation, and he immediately concealed himself. He'd come to kill Yi Xian in secret because the sword sect didn't want others to know about it. But now, Yi Xian had destroyed the formation, so if he continued attacking, then others would definitely find out. At that time, even if he killed Yi Xian and seized the precious treasure, the sword sect would still become the target of public criticism. Yi Xian had caused quite a commotion when he fled. So many experts were rushing over from the shadows. A voice resounded from where Yi Xian fought the old man. Someone has made a move. Pursue Yi Xian with all your strength. Don't let others succeed first. As soon as he finished speaking, a wave of ripples appeared in the space here. After Yi Xian escaped, he came to a deep mountain. He used the chaotic energy to hide himself completely. However, he was still a little worried. So he immersed his consciousness into his body and asked, "Senior, is there any way to hide me so that even experts in the Tao realm can't find me?" A short while later, the voice resounded, "The energy you possess is sufficient." Yi Xian shook his head. "I was still noticed by others just now." The voice said, "That's because you didn't utilize it properly." Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Please provide me with your guidance, Senior." The voice said, "Control your energy, let it spread throughout your body, and become one with it." Yi Xian hurriedly did as he was told, and soon, the chaotic energy spread throughout his body. A short while later, Yi Xian discovered that he was faintly discernible. Yi Xian was confused. "Senior, what's this?" The voice said, "Your energy is born from chaos, and it is one with the chaos of heaven and earth. If you become one with it, you will become one with the chaos of heaven and earth. Apart from a few special people, ordinary people won't be able to detect you. Of course, you can't make a move during this period. If you do, your energy will spread, and others will be able to detect you." Yi Xian asked, "Senior, can the chaotic energy only be used to conceal energy?" The voice said, "Of course not. It can purify the body, and your body is slowly changing right now. You just haven't sensed it yet. The energy's effect on you is continuous, and it can continuously purify your body. In the end, you will discover its true benefits." Yi Xian asked again, "Is there anything else it can do?" The voice said after a moment of silence, "In your heart am I omniscient." Yi Xian. The voice said, "Next time when you ask me a question, can you ask something more profound? This kind of question is really low level." Yi Xian hesitated for a second. Then he asked, "Sir, do you think these strong people I've met are very weak in your eyes?" The voice didn't answer but asked in return, "The one below me, the one on the 5th floor, seems to be an emperor?" Yi Xian nodded. He said he's an emperor. "But I don't understand what that means." The voice said, "An emperor means that he has proven his Tao. Do you understand what it means to prove your Tao?" Yi Xian. "Is it the great Tao of authentication?" The voice said after a moment of silence, "Is that bullshit?" Yi Xian. The voice said, "The so-called Tao is the ultimate truth, source, rules, principles, realms, and so on. Tao gives birth to all things. Tao exists in all things, and exists in all forms in nature. Tao, this word contains countless rules. What we know is Tao, what we don't know is Tao. Proving Tao is to transcend, to constantly sublimate, to find the source of all things, to achieve eternity. That guy on the 5th floor, he achieved this, so he can be an emperor." Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then asked, "Is Tao the highest point?" The voice said, "Of course not. For us, proving Tao is just the beginning. Dao is divided into 4 realms: initial awareness Dao, past Dao, present Dao, and future Dao. Yi Xian asked again, "What about above?" The voice said after a moment of silence, then said, "It's the legendary Dao breaking. Being in Dao, you are restricted by Dao. If you break Dao, you will achieve eternity." Yi Xian asked again, "What about the Dao breaker?" The voice said after a moment of silence, "Now I'll allow you to ask some low-level questions." Yi Xian. P.S. Today is the first, brothers, there must be a lot of guaranteed monthly votes, asking for monthly votes, asking for support. Thanks. Chapter 528. Yi Xian chuckled sheepishly. "Senior, what do you mean by Dao breaking?" The man suddenly asked. "What's your current realm?" Yi Xian replied, "I'm almost at ethereal opening." The man said, "So it's ethereal opening. I thought you'd already attained Dao breaking." Yi Xian was stunned. "What do you mean, senior?" The man said flatly, "Why are you blindly going to the Dao breaking realm, if you don't even understand your current realm? Did you eat too much?" Yi Xian was speechless. The 6th person added, "You can see further, but it's more important to walk the path you're walking on." Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." Just as the man said, the most important thing for him right now was to tread the path he was on. What Dao breaking or Dao proving? That was too far away from him. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian asked, "Senior, the swordsman I encountered just now was a Dao realm expert as well. How is this Dao realm different from the Dao proving you mentioned?" The man was silent for a moment before he said, "I don't know what the Dao realm is either." Yi Xian was speechless. Yi Xian didn't waste any more time with the man, so he left the mountain range stealthily. As soon as he left the mountain range, his expression changed abruptly because several auras had appeared above him. "They noticed me?" Yi Xian didn't show himself, and he was still hiding in the shadows. Meanwhile, several consciousnesses swept over his position. Yi Xian's face fell, and he was ready to attack at a moment's notice. But it didn't take long for the consciousnesses to vanish. 3 people had appeared above him without any warning, but they hadn't noticed him. The leader of the group was a middle-aged man. It was the leader of the sword sect, Chen Xianfeng. There was an old man with a sword by his side. Yi Xian knew the old man as well. It was the old man he'd fought earlier. There was a tall and sturdy man with a huge sword on his back by his side. In the air, Chen Xianfeng scanned the surroundings. "There's no aura," the old man said. "His concealment technique is formidable indeed." The burly man suddenly asked, "Why did old he fail?" Chen Xianfeng also looked at the old man. The old man said in a low voice, "This person's strength is extraordinary." Chen Xianfeng frowned. "So strong that even old he couldn't kill him instantly?" The sword-hugging elder shook his head. "If we were to fight, he would naturally be no match for me. Even if I wanted to kill him instantly, I wouldn't be able to do it. Of course, if I disregard everything and pursue him, I'm confident that I can kill him." Chen Xianfeng shook his head. "We can't let the world know that our sword sect attacked him. Otherwise, even if we kill him and obtain that treasure, those powers in secret will join forces against our sword sect. At that time, it would be extremely disadvantageous to our sword sect." The old man nodded slightly. "It's precisely because of this that I didn't dare to chase after him." The man with the sword on his back suddenly said, "Then what should we do now?" With that, he and the sword-bearing elder looked at Li Xianfeng. Li Xianfeng smiled. "There's no rush. There are others who are more anxious than us." As he spoke, he looked toward Shenwu City. "That Yi Xian's friends and younger sister are in Wuyuan. This time, I want to see if that fellow, He Liantian, will compromise." The old man said in a low voice, "What if they don't compromise?" Li Xianfeng smiled. "Those people won't compromise on Yi Xian's matter. If Wuyuan doesn't compromise, then it means that they will fight those powers. At that time, our sword sect will reap the benefits." The sword-bearing elder said in a low voice, "What if he's willing to compromise?" Chen Xianfeng replied indifferently, "Then Wuyuan will have to give up on those monstrous geniuses. Not only that, but Wuyuan's prestige in the hearts of those students will plummet. No matter what he chooses, it will be beneficial to our sword sect." The old man suddenly said, The sect's founding ancestor has decreed that the sword sect and Wu Yuan will be friends for generations. Chen Xianfeng replied softly. The times are changing. As he spoke, he raised his head and looked towards the horizon. My sword sect will absolutely not hide within this city forever. After a while the three of them left. Below, Yi Xian's face was dark to the point it was terrifying. This sword sect's sect leader's heart was not just ordinary viciousness. After a while, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. He had returned to Xinwu City once more. An eye for an eye. He was not angry that the sword sect did not want to protect him. After all, they did not owe Yi Xian anything, and had no obligation to protect him. However, the sword sect had sent people to kill him, and even plotted against his friends and younger sister. That was Yi Xian's enemy. As for enemies, he would either kill them on the spot, or let them die a horrible death. Yi Xian did not openly seek revenge on the sword sect. He had not overestimated himself to such an extent. He knew very well what his advantages were. Yi Xian snuck into the sword sect, and his target was the sword sect's Divine Sword Pavilion. The so-called Divine Sword Pavilion was the sword sect's treasury, and many of the sword sect's weapons were stored here. Yi Xian arrived at the Divine Sword Pavilion. There were no guards at the entrance, so he quietly snuck in. After entering, he saw swords everywhere. There were more than 100 swords in sight, and all of them were of high quality. And these swords were all inside the light pillars. In the dark, Yi Xian's face sank. Needless to say, if he touched these light pillars, many sword sect's experts would appear before him. But fortunately, these light pillars couldn't stop him. Space Dao Law. To a certain extent, the Space Dao Law was the natural counter to these formations. Because so long as these formations were within space, then he could use the Space Dao Law to break them with ease. Yi Xian circulated the Space Dao Law, and it didn't take long for all the swords within the light pillars to vanish. However, the light pillars were still unharmed. Yi Xian didn't stop, and went to the second floor. There were comparatively fewer swords on the second floor, but they were all immortal artifacts, and there were an entire 36 of them. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly, and he put the swords away before going to the third floor. There were only 3 swords on the third floor, but all of them were at the creation realm. Yi Xian didn't spare them a second glance, and he directly utilized the Space Dao Law to put them into the Prism Pagoda. After that, he went to the third floor. There was only a portrait on the fourth floor. On the portrait, there was a sword with a sheath. Yi Xian was stunned when he saw this sword. A moment later, a sheathed sword appeared in his palm. He'd obtained this sword from a sect called the Sword Sect with the Emperor Hound, and he hadn't been able to draw it back then. So he'd kept it in the Prism Pagoda all this time. What exactly is this sword? What's the relationship between this sword sect and those 2 sword sects that he'd encountered earlier? He had a lot of questions. Yi Xian gazed at the sword in his hand. It seemed to be sealed within it, because he was able to sense that it wanted to come out but couldn't. Yi Xian didn't think too much about it, and was just about to leave when there was movement from below. Yi Xian's expression changed, and he hurriedly merged into space and didn't dare move. Meanwhile, a panicked voice suddenly resounded from the first floor. There's a thief! As soon as the voice resounded, numerous formidable auras appeared in the surroundings of the sword pavilion. In the dark, Yi Xian did not dare to move at all. Meanwhile, Chen Xianfeng suddenly appeared on the 4th floor, and the old man with the sword in his arms was there as well. Chen Xianfeng glanced at the surroundings and remained silent. The old man spoke solemnly. Who did it? Yi Xian? Chen Xianfeng spoke softly. Who else could it be? The old man frowned slightly. How did he do it? Chen Xuanfeng's face remained expressionless. Who knows? The old man spoke solemnly. He probably hasn't gone far. I'll go take a look around. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and vanished. Chen Xianfeng turned around and left as well. Suddenly, the 4th floor fell silent. Just like that, around an hour later, Chen Xianfeng appeared once more, and he glanced coldly at the surroundings before vanishing. 2 hours later, Chen Xianfeng appeared once more. He scanned the surroundings once more, but there was nothing around him. After a moment of silence, he spread his divine sense, and it didn't take long for it to cover practically the entire fourth floor. However, he still didn't notice anything. Chen Xianfeng withdrew his divine sense, turned around, and left. This time, Yi Xian walked out. He walked up to the painting, left a line of words, and then turned around to leave. After some time, some sword sect elders came to the fourth floor, and when they saw the line of words on the ground, their faces turned extremely ugly. A moment later, Chen Xianfeng also came to the fourth floor, and when he saw the line of words below the painting, he narrowed his eyes. The line of words was, "Chen Xianfeng, you fool, I'm right in front of you, and you can't even see me. Are you blind?" A moment later, Chen Xianfeng spoke indifferently, "What a good Yi Xian. I'd like to see how long you can last." As soon as he finished speaking, he flicked his sleeve, and the line of words on the ground disappeared. After leaving the sword sect, Yi Xian didn't leave Shenwu City. To him, the most dangerous place would be relatively safer. Not only that, but he also had to be on guard, in case those people attacked Yi Ling and the others. Yi Xian found an abandoned courtyard in the city, and he sat cross-legged in the room. This time, he obtained 3 manifestation swords from the sword sect, and a total of 36 immortal swords. There were also more than 60 sage swords. It was a huge profit. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian quickly took out the sheathed sword. Yi Xian asked, "Senior, do you know about this sword?" The sixth replied, "I don't." Yi Xian asked again, "Then do you know what's so special about this sword?" The sixth was silent for a moment, and then said, "This sword is sealed." Yi Xian quickly asked again, "And then?" The sixth replied, "And then it's a sword." Yi Xian was struck dumb. "What else?" The sixth replied, "And it's not a very long sword." Yi Xian's face darkened. "Is this guy playing with me?" At this time the sixth suddenly said, "Throw it in." Yi Xian quickly threw the sword into the world prism pagoda, and a moment later, the sixth replied, "You want to pull out this sword?" Yi Xian nodded. The sixth replied softly, "This sword is very destructive, especially against the harmony of heaven. It's best that you don't pull it out, otherwise, you will be rejected by heaven and earth." Yi Xian. Chapter 529. Rejected by heaven and earth. Yi Xian was confused. "Senior, what sword is this? Why is it so special?" The sixth replied, "I don't know what sword it is, but it's no ordinary sword. The lethality of this sword was extremely great. This lethality did not only refer to its power, but it also had a great restraining effect on the laws and origin of the world. Once this sword is used, it will be rejected by heaven and earth, or even targeted." Yi Xian hesitated. "What will happen if I'm targeted by heaven and earth?" The sixth replied, "Nothing much. You'll just get struck by lightning from time to time." Yi Xian. The sheathed sword appeared in front of Yi Xian. The sixth replied, "This sword is too powerful, and its killing intent is too strong. It's not something you can control right now." Yi Xian nodded. "Looks like I can't use this sword for now." The sixth replied, "Also, you need to be vigilant at all times. Don't let yourself develop a bad habit of relying on external things. Once you rely on them, you'll neglect your own development. As time goes by, you'll realize that you're nothing but external things." Yi Xian nodded. "I've learned a lot." Relying on external things. Even though he kept reminding himself not to rely on external things, there were many times when bad habits were formed unknowingly. This was the scariest. After Yi Xian sheathed his sword, he seemed to have thought of something. He asked again, "Sir, what do you think I lack now?" The sixth replied, "Time." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "I know I'm lacking time, but what I'm saying is, what do I lack in terms of cultivation?" The sixth replied, "Foundation and accumulation." Yi Xian frowned. "Foundation? Accumulation?" The sixth replied, "A great Confucian of the mortal world not only needs to be knowledgeable, but also experience the vicissitudes of life and the fickleness of human nature. Only then can one become a great master and form his own school. The so-called foundation is the sword Dao you've learned, and the sword Dao you know. Right now, the number of sword techniques and thoughts you've learned can be counted on one hand. As for experience, you're only 20 years old. What kind of life experience do you have to speak of?" Yi Xian was silent. The sixth floor continued. The word sword is all about enlightenment. And this enlightenment is the Tao. The Tao encompasses all things. Do you understand? Yi Xian smiled bitterly. I don't really understand, the sixth master said. Do you know how the old man with the sword was stronger than you? Yi Xian asked, where? The sixth house replied. That's what it means to have a solid foundation. His sword moves are grand, and contain the magical laws of heaven and earth. But your sword only has speed and power, and a bit of intent. That's not enough. Yi Xian nodded slightly. I understand. The person on the sixth floor said. These can't be rushed. Yi Xian asked. Then what should I do now? Now that there was no one to protect him, he would definitely die. At this moment, the space in front of him trembled slightly. Soon Baiji's voice appeared in front of him. 6 Dao realm experts have entered Wu Yuan. You must be mentally prepared. Wu Yuan. Yi Xian suddenly stood up. Obviously, those people could not find him, so they started to pressure Wu Yuan. They wanted to use Yi Ling and the others to force him to show himself. Yi Xian said solemnly. Miss Baiji, can I trouble you to continue to investigate for me? Baiji said. This time, this matter was planned by the Sword Sect. Their goal is not only to target you, but also Wu Yuan. Moreover, they seem to be looking for you in the dark. You must be careful. Also, don't go to Wu Yuan. As far as I know, Wu Yuan has no intention of giving up on Shaoan and the others for now. Yi Xian's face was gloomy. He naturally could not pin his hopes on Wu Yuan. This matter still depended on himself. As if he thought of something, Yi Xian asked, Is the Sword sect leader Li Xianfeng in Wu Yuan? Baiji said, Yes. Yi Xian nodded, turned around and left. His target was the Sword Sect. This matter was planned by the Sword Sect, and the Sword Sect did not want others to know that they were targeting him. Therefore he had to make it bigger. He could not let the other party become a whore, and then build a chastity memorial arch. Wu Yuan. Inside the martial arts hall, Helian Tian sat at the head of the table with 7 people sitting on both sides below him. 6 old men, and the Sword sect leader Chen Xianfeng. Helian Tian smiled. You came to my Wu Yuan to ask Wu Yuan to hand over little sister Yi Xian? Chen Xianfeng remained silent and only drank his tea. Opposite of Chen Xianfeng, a black-robed old man looked at Helian Tian. Dean Helian, we have always respected Wu Yuan. This time, our goal is only that Yi Ling, Helian Tian smiled. Do you know that Yi Ling is a student of my Wu Yuan? The black-robed old man glanced at Helian Tian and spoke indifferently. Dean Helian, this old man will not beat around the bush. We must take Yi Ling and the others. Helian Tian looked the black-robed old man in the eyes. Are you threatening me? The black-robed old man's eyes narrowed slightly, and the atmosphere here instantly became tense. Meanwhile, an old man suddenly appeared at the entrance to the hall. He wore a white robe, and his white hair was tied into a ponytail. Even though there were many wrinkles on his face, he emanated an extremely formidable, imposing aura. Chen Xuanfeng's expression instantly changed when he saw the white-robed old man. He was the previous dean of Wu Yuan, Wu Wen. Wu Wen gazed at the black-robed old man, and then he took a step forward. The black-robed old man's expression instantly changed drastically, and then he vanished on the spot in the next moment. A breath of time later, the black-robed old man returned to where he stood earlier. However, there was a wisp of blood on the corner of his mouth, and his arms were trembling violently. The expressions of everyone here became extremely solemn when they witnessed this scene. Moreover, the black-robed old man's eyes were filled with fear. Wu Wen glanced at Chen Xianfeng. When did the Sword Sect lower its head to anyone all those years ago? When did the Sword Sect play such tricks? You've completely thrown away the Sword Sect's thousands of years of pride and reputation. Chen Xuanfeng's face remained expressionless, and he was just about to speak when Wu Wen waved his hand. A swordsman like you isn't qualified to speak to an old man. As he spoke, he glanced at the black-robed old man and the others. My Wu Yuan has no intention to participate in the struggles of the mortal world, nor do we have such great ambition to dominate divine martial city. However, we won't fight, and we will absolutely not allow others to bully us. Since those kids have joined my Wu Yuan, then they're students of my Wuyuan. Touching them is equivalent to touching my Wuyuan. When he spoke up to hear, a wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of his mouth. You've attained the Tao realm at any rate, yet you're actually using the friends of others to threaten them. Even this old man feels ashamed for all of you. The expressions of everyone here became extremely unsightly, because this was a slap to the face. However, none of them dared to say anything. Wu Wen's strength was clearly stronger than them. Moreover, they were in Wuyuan right now. If Wuyuan utilized all its strength, then it was entirely possible for it to make them stay here. Meanwhile, Wu Wen suddenly said, "Are all of you still not going to fuck off? Could it be that you want the old man to keep all of you for a meal?" The black-robed old man and the others didn't say anything else, and they just turned around and left. They didn't even leave behind a single threatening word. They weren't stupid. They were clearly weaker than Chen Xianfeng, yet they still threatened him. Wasn't that no different from courting death? Chen Xianfeng was about to leave as well. Meanwhile, Wu Wen gazed at him once more. If you and your disciple wanted to dominate Divine Martial City, then you could have just openly challenged my Wuyuan to a battle. If you won, then my Wuyuan wouldn't be a sore loser. But now, all of you are playing tricks, and the old man is looking down on all of you. You're truly a disgrace to the founding ancestor of your sword sect. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Chen Xuanfeng's expression was extremely unsightly. He Liantian smiled and said, "Brother Chen, don't be angry. Master is a straightforward person, and he likes to speak the truth. Don't take it to heart." Chen Xianfeng almost went berserk. P.S. Asking for votes. Thank you for the gifts and support from all my friends yesterday. Thank you everyone. I'm fortunate to have all of you along the way. I'm grateful to all of you. Chapter 530. Li Xianfeng glanced coldly at He Liantian and was about to speak when his expression suddenly changed. He immediately stood up and transformed into a ray of light that vanished outside the hall. Li Xianfeng and Qin Shan exchanged glances, and there was a trace of bewilderment in their eyes. Why did Li Xianfeng leave in such a hurry? He Liantian spoke in a low voice. Send someone to investigate later. Qin Shan nodded and said, They won't let this matter rest. He Liantian fell silent. Qin Shan asked again, What do you plan to do? He Liantian spoke in a low voice. We've already fallen out, and I'm afraid they'll go to extremes. Tell Shaoan and the others not to leave the city. No, not to leave Wuyuan. Qin Shan nodded and was about to leave. However, He Liantian spoke again. Pass down my order. Tell everyone in Wuyuan to return immediately. Besides that, you and the revered elders must be on guard at all times to prevent any sneak attacks. Qin Shan nodded. I understand. As he spoke, a cold smile arose on the corners of his mouth. Let me see if they dare to openly come to Wuyuan to kidnap people. As soon as he finished speaking, he swiftly vanished from the hall. He Liantian remained silent on the spot, because he had a feeling that this matter wasn't so simple. After Li Xianfeng left, he immediately returned to the sword sect. When he returned to the sword sect, his expression instantly turned extremely unsightly. Because the spirit energy in an area of 500 kilometers around the sword sect had completely vanished, as if it had been sucked dry. Spirit energy had dried up. Presently, the spirit energy in the sword sect had dried up completely. Meanwhile, an old man with a sword in his hand appeared by Li Xuanfeng's side. Li Xuanfeng's expression sank. Yi Xian did this? The old man spoke in a low voice. It should be him. Li Xianfeng glanced at the surroundings. None of us in the sword sect noticed him? The old man shook his head. The spirit energy suddenly vanished. We immediately searched the surroundings, but we found nothing. Li Xianfeng narrowed his eyes. How did he do it? Could it be that supreme treasure? The old man spoke in a low voice. His strength and natural talent are at the top even in our sword sect. If he doesn't die, then he'll definitely become a calamity to our sword sect in the future. Li Xianfeng fell silent for a short moment before he said, Send the order. Yi Xian stole a precious treasure of my sword sect. From this moment onward, all disciples of my sword sect are responsible for killing him. The old man looked at Li Xianfeng hesitantly. This, Li Xianfeng spoke indifferently. If we don't do that, then our sword sect won't be able to act against him openly. Only then will we be able to stand on the side of justice." The old man fell silent for a moment, before he turned around and left. Li Xianfeng's face turned cold. "You want to play? Then I'll play with you." With that, he turned around and disappeared. The sudden disappearance of the sword sect's spirit energy quickly spread throughout Shenwu City, but it didn't take long for another piece of news to suppress it. Yi Xian stole the sword sect's supreme treasure. Who was Yi Xian? The people of Shenwu City weren't familiar with this name, because Yi Xian hadn't been in Shenwu City for long. But now, after the sword sect made an announcement, the people of Shenwu City looked down on Yi Xian to the extreme. Stealing from a sect, and a swordsman at that, was beyond embarrassing. Moreover, many students in Wuyuan City were taking pleasure in Yi Xian's misfortune. In short, the sword sect could be said to be standing at the peak of morality. In a shabby room, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, and his face was slightly pale. When he used the Divine King's throne before, his body couldn't bear it. The Divine King's throne was his only Dao realm divine artifact, and he still couldn't fully control it. Not only that, he had decided to use it less in the future. At this moment, the sixth floor suddenly said, "Your chair isn't bad." Yi Xian was curious. Why? The sixth floor said, "This item contains a Dao law, and this Dao surpasses the Dao law of your starfield." Yi Xian was curious. There are Dao laws in our starfield too? The sixth floor said, "Every world has its own Dao laws. Without Dao laws, the world will be in chaos. For example, when you fight with someone and destroy the space will repair itself. That's the Dao law." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "If the Dao laws of this world are destroyed, does that mean the world will be destroyed?" The sixth floor said, "You want to do that?" Yi Xian shook his head. Destroy the world? He wasn't that crazy. The sixth floor said, "Dao laws aren't that easy to destroy. For now, you need to be as strong as the fifth floor to destroy the Dao laws of a world." Yi Xian smiled. "Senior can do it too, right?" The sixth floor said, "Keep a low profile." Yi Xian was speechless. Yi Xian stopped talking to the sixth floor and focused on absorbing the immortal crystals. An hour later, Baiji's voice sounded in front of him. A moment later, Yi Xian's face turned cold. Not only did the sword sect want to kill him, but they also wanted to stand on the side of justice. It made sense. The sword sect had built up a reputation in Shenwu City for so many years. They wouldn't want to lose it just like that. Yi Xian stood up and walked outside. The sixth floor said, "I have a small suggestion." Yi Xian stopped. "Senior, please speak." The sixth floor said, "Leave this place and come back in 10 years. No one here will be your match." "Leave?" Yi Xian shook his head. He knew that he was at an absolute disadvantage now. Leaving was definitely the best choice. However, he knew that once he left, those people would go after Yi Ling and Shaowen. If he ran, his friends and brothers would suffer. The sixth floor said, "Then are you going to fight them to the end?" Yi Xian chuckled. "Senior, can you come out?" The sixth floor said, "Don't even think about it. I can't even protect myself." Yi Xian was confused. "Why do you say that?" The sixth floor said, "Before the swordsman left." At this point he suddenly stopped talking. Yi Xian figured it out when he heard that. Before the swordsman left, he attacked the sixth floor. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian disappeared. This time, he didn't go to the sword sect, but to Tongbao Chamber of Commerce. In a private room, Baiji was sitting in front of a desk, reviewing something. Suddenly, she looked up at the corner. "Young Master Yi?" Yi Xian appeared quietly, his face solemn. "You can still detect me." After he concealed himself with the chaotic qi, even a Dao realm expert couldn't detect him. But as soon as he arrived, Baiji found him. Baiji smiled. "Young Master Yi, don't be surprised. I can sense young Master Yi because I'm a little special." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "Luckily I didn't make you my enemy, Baiji. Otherwise, I wouldn't even have a place to hide." Baiji flicked her finger, and a storage ring fell in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian glanced at the storage ring. It was full of fairy artifact swords. Baiji was about to speak, but suddenly her expression changed. "Oh no, leave." Yi Xian was slightly stunned. In the next moment, he turned around with the intention of leaving. However, right at this moment, the entire Heavenly Treasures Chamber of Commerce suddenly exploded, and a powerful force blasted towards Yi Xian and Baiji. Yi Xian suddenly appeared in the sky above Baiji. The next moment, he thrust the sword in his hand upward. Wang! A sword cry shook the sky. Boom! The powerful force shattered, but Yi Xian fell to the ground. At this moment, 6 old men appeared around him. 6 Dao Realm experts. Next to Yi Xian, Baiji said softly, "I'm sorry, I should have known that they would set up an ambush here." Yi Xian shook his head. "It has nothing to do with you, I was careless." In the air, the black-robed old man looked down at Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, do you see that there are 6 Dao Realm experts by your side?" Yi Xian looked at the black-robed old man. The latter said, "The 6 of us don't want to push things too far. We just want the treasure you have. Hand it over, and we will leave immediately. We will not harm your life." "Hand over the treasure?" Yi Xian grinned. "Have you forgotten what happened to the Star Lord? Have you forgotten what happened to the never-ending starfield?" Hearing this, the black-robed old man's expression darkened. "Are you threatening us?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I'm just telling you that the treasure is good, but it will cost you your life," the black-robed old man said indifferently. "The 6 of us know that you have people behind you. You can call them out. If we lose, we will not mention the treasure again." Chapter 531. Friend. Yi Xian's heart felt rather warm, because Mocia's ability to step forward at a time like this meant that Mocia had really taken Yi Xian as a friend. Dao Realm. 6 Dao Realm experts. Even if he and Mocia joined forces, they still had no chance of winning. But Mocia had still stepped forward. In midair, the black-robed old man looked down at Mocia with an expressionless face. "You're an extraordinary genius as well. Why sacrifice your life for others?" Mocia smiled. "You don't have to worry about that." The black-robed old man's eyes narrowed slightly, and he was just about to attack. However, 2 women suddenly appeared by Yi Xian's side. Endless Chain. Enlancio. The black-robed old man glanced at Enlancio and the others with an icy cold expression. "Since all of you want to die, then this old man will fulfill your wish." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished. At the instant that the black-robed old man vanished, the 5 people behind him vanished as well. 6 against 4. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "I'll fight too." As soon as he finished speaking, he transformed into a ray of light that shot into the sky. "Fight 2 Dao Realm experts?" How? Yi Xian wasn't confident, but he knew that he had to fight too. Otherwise, the pressure on Enlancio and the others would be enormous. Yi Xian immediately utilized the Dragon Soul, Dragon Energy, and Emoku Energy. With the boost from the Dragon Soul and Dragon Energy, Yi Xian's aura rose explosively. Yi Xian charged straight at one of the gray-robed old men. His goal was to kill one person first. He had to kill one person first. Yi Xian held the soul-quelling sword in his right hand. At this moment, he'd raised his speed to his limits. The gray-robed old man laughed coldly when he saw Yi Xian charge at him. He didn't retreat, but he charged at Yi Xian instead. An instant later, Yi Xian slashed down with his sword. The gray-robed old man smashed his fist forward. This punch shook the heavens and earth. The gray-robed elder's fist landed on Yi Xian's soul-suppressing sword. In an instant, Yi Xian was sent flying with his sword. The gray-clothed old man was just about to follow up with another attack when his expression changed drastically, because he actually felt his soul vanish at this moment. The gray-robed old man was horrified. He hurriedly placed his palm on his chest in an attempt to suppress his soul. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly slashed at the gray-robed old man from afar. Soul separation. As Yi Xian's voice fell, the soul-suppressing sword in his hand trembled violently, and a strange force instantly enveloped the gray-robed old man. The gray-robed elder's expression changed drastically as he roared, "No!" As soon as he finished speaking, his other hand suddenly pressed against the space between his eyebrows in an attempt to suppress his soul. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly clenched his left hand. Slash! As soon as he finished speaking, A drop of blood silently transformed into a ray of sword light on the gray-robed old man's right fist, where the soul-suppressing sword had cut open earlier, and it pierced through the gray-robed old man's forehead. Hiss! The gray-robed old man's body stiffened as countless amounts of blood sprayed out. The moment the blood appeared, it actually transformed into rays of sword light that instantly slashed the gray-robed old man's body. God blood technique. This was his other trump card that he hadn't used earlier. But at this moment, he had no choice but to use it. Because if he didn't use it, he wasn't confident in his ability to kill his opponent. Nearby, the gray-robed old man was directly sliced into pieces by the swords condensed from blood. However, the gray-robed old man's soul was still there. However, his soul had become completely illusory. Before his physical body collapsed, he could barely suppress Yi Xian's soul-suppressing sword, and the soul-suppressing sword's soul fragment. But now that his physical body had collapsed, he couldn't suppress his soul any longer. From the beginning to the end of the battle between Yi Xian and the gray-robed old man, only 2 breaths of time had passed, and it was during this time that the gray-robed old man had perished. On the other side, the black-robed old man who had intended to attack Yi Xian was stunned, instantly killing a Dao Realm expert. Did Yi Xian do this? His mind was blank at this moment. It wasn't just the gray-robed old man. Even Li Xianfeng and the others who were hiding in the dark had expressions of disbelief on their faces. Even though Yi Xian had utilized all things, they couldn't kill a Dao Realm expert. Moreover, it was an instant kill. That was a Dao Realm expert. The old man with the sword in his arms spoke solemnly. We still underestimated his combat strength. Li Xianfeng nodded. We can't underestimate him in the future when we fight him. Fearful. Even he was fearful at this moment. Yi Xian had such formidable combat strength at such a young age. If he was given more time. Thinking of this, Li Xuanfeng's eyes gradually turned cold. On the other side, Wu Yuan's Dean He Liantian was also shocked. Clearly, he hadn't expected Yi Xian to kill a Dao Realm expert in an instant. Behind He Liantian, Qin Shan said softly, "This person is indeed a monster." He Liantian said softly, "If Shaoan and the others are in danger, be prepared to act at any time." Qin Shan asked, "What about Yi Xian?" He Liantian shook his head. "We can't save him. If we save him, there will be endless disasters." Qin Shan nodded. Right now, Yi Xian was like a huge whirlpool. Even Wu Yuan didn't dare to step into this whirlpool. The price would be very, very high. In the distance, the battle was still going on. And Lanxiu, Lian Wanli, and Mo Xia were fighting 4 Dao Realm experts, and the 3 of them were directly suppressed from the beginning. Although the 3 of them were super monsters, Dao Realm experts weren't cabbages. They were the top experts in this world. It wasn't that there weren't people who wanted to surmount realms to challenge Dao Realm experts, but it was very rare. Moreover, they were fighting with numbers, and Lanxiu and the others naturally couldn't defeat them. It was already extremely terrifying that they weren't directly crushed. On the other side, the black-robed old man stared fixedly at Yi Xian. At this moment, he was both shocked and furious. Yi Xian's instant killing of the gray-robed old man had truly shocked him, because Yi Xian hadn't even reached the myriad arts realm yet. This couldn't be described as terrifying. Yi Xian glanced at Lanxiu and the others. When he saw them being suppressed, Yi Xian's face sank. He gripped his sword tightly in his right hand and walked towards the black-robed old man. The black-robed old man's eyes narrowed slightly when he witnessed this scene. Besides killing intent, there was a trace of seriousness in his eyes. At this moment, he didn't look down upon Yi Xian any longer. Yi Xian held his sword tightly in his right hand, while strands of formidable aura surged out incessantly from within him. Moreover, the soul-suppressing sword in his hand was emanating an extremely powerful aura. With the boost from the dragon soul, dragon energy, and Emoku energy, Yi Xian's aura was comparable to a Dao Realm expert. Right at this moment, the black-robed old man in front of Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward, and then he smashed his fist forward. He decided to make the first move, because Yi Xian was gathering force. As soon as the old man smashed his fist forward, the entire space in the surroundings started to seethe like boiling water. It was an extremely shocking sight. especially when a formidable force arrived in front of Yi Xian. As this formidable force pressed down upon him, Yi Xian suddenly felt the surroundings fall silent. At this moment, he couldn't even breathe. Yi Xian suddenly clenched his left hand tightly, and then a strand of powerful dragon energy instantly surged into his right hand. A moment later, he slashed forward with his sword in hand. Hiss! A dazzling ray of golden light slashed down in a straight line. Bang! The space in front of Yi Xian was obliterated while Yi Xian was blasted back repeatedly. This time, he retreated by over 1 kilometer. However, the black-robed old man retreated by over 100 m as well. He just stopped when 2 flying swords silently slashed towards him. The black-robed old man's gaze was icy cold as he pressed his right hand down lightly. Defend! As soon as he spoke, an invisible barrier appeared around him, and the 2 flying swords were instantly shattered. Suddenly, Yi Xian appeared in front of him, and then a sword stabbed towards the center of the black-robed old man's forehead. The black-robed old man clasped his hands together and directly blocked Yi Xian's soul-subduing sword. However, his expression changed drastically in the next moment. He quickly let go of the soul-subduing sword and retreated rapidly. Yi Xian's sword was a soul-subduing sword. The moment the black-robed old man's hands touched the soul-subduing sword, he was shocked to find that his soul seemed to be separated from his physical body. As soon as the black-robed old man retreated, Yi Xian stabbed towards the black-robed old man from afar. Soul-subduing. As soon as Yi Xian's voice fell, the soul-subduing sword in his hand shook violently, and a mysterious force instantly enveloped the black-robed old man. The black-robed old man's expression changed drastically, because that was how Yi Xian had killed the gray-robed old man. At this critical moment, he suddenly pressed his hands against the center of his forehead, and at the same time, he turned around and roared, "Stop him!" Hearing the black-robed old man's words, a Dao realm expert gave up on Moc's group of 3, and turned around to charge at Yi Xian. Yi Xian had no choice but to give up on the black-robed old man. He turned around and slashed down with his sword. Buzz! The sound of a sword's cry shook the sky. Then, an earth-shattering explosion resounded. Rumble! Yi Xian retreated hundreds of meters with his sword in hand. The Dao realm expert didn't attack Yi Xian again. Instead, he retreated to the black-robed old man's side and placed his hand on the black-robed old man's shoulder. A moment later, the black-robed old man gradually stabilized. The black-robed old man looked up at Yi Xian, and the seriousness in his eyes had turned into fear. Be careful of the sword in his hand. Sword. At this moment, Yi Xian's sword technique and the soul-subduing sword could already kill Dao realm experts. Because he had the support of the dragon soul, dragon energy and Moku energy. Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corners of his mouth. He glanced at Enlancio and the other 2. Enlancio and the other 2 were currently 3 against 3. After it became 3 against 3, Enlancio and the other 2 were no longer at a disadvantage. However, Yi Xian was very well aware that it wouldn't be beneficial for them if this continued, because his body was starting to feel uncomfortable. After all, the dragon soul and dragon energy weren't permanent. Moreover, there were others watching from the surroundings like the sword sect. He had to end this quickly. Yi Xian looked at the black-robed old man and Moku. He gripped his sword tightly in his right hand and was about to attack. However, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared at the side. It was Li Xianfeng. Li Xianfeng glanced coldly at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, my sword sect took you in out of kindness and taught you sword techniques and sword Dao. However, I never expected that you would steal a treasure from my sword sect. Your actions are undoubtedly cruel and unscrupulous. You're worse than a pig or a dog. A sword appeared in his hand when he spoke up to this point, and he continued, "Although you're heartless, I can't be unjust. Kill yourself, and I can guarantee that you'll have an intact corpse and reincarnate. P.S. I'm writing the story, and it will be available to everyone soon. Finally, I'll give you a spoiler. The owner of the Prism Pagoda has appeared in the sword domain. Did anyone guess it?" Chapter 532. The black-robed old man glanced coldly at Li Xianfeng. Li Xianfeng can't sit still any longer when he sees that Yi Xian is about to fall. The black-robed old man turned around and gazed at the others who were fighting in Lanxiao and the others. It didn't take long for them to stop and return to his side, and Lanxiao and the others returned to Yi Xian's side. And Lanxiao spoke softly, "Let's go." "Leave." Yi Xian laughed bitterly. All four of them could leave, but he couldn't. Meanwhile, Li Xianfeng suddenly gazed at the black-robed old man and smiled. "Brother Yilan. He's a traitor of my sword sect. I hope Brother Yilan won't interfere in the matters of my sword sect." The black-robed old man called Yilan spoke indifferently. "Brother Li, don't tell me that the precious treasure in his possession belongs to your sword sect as well." Li Xuanfeng's eyes narrowed slightly, and he was about to speak. However, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Don't all of you want it? I'll give it to all of you." As soon as he finished speaking, a black xiaota suddenly appeared between his brows, and then the black xiaota appeared above him. As soon as the black xiaota appeared, an invisible pressure suddenly appeared in the surroundings. At this moment, even Dao realm experts felt a strand of formidable pressure. At this moment, the expressions of everyone here had become solemn. Li Xianfeng stared fixedly at the black xiaota, and his eyes were filled with undisguised greed. He Liantian was gazing at the black xiaota as well. There was no greed in his eyes, only a solemn expression. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Don't all of you want it? I'll give it to all of you." As soon as he finished speaking, he led in Lanxiao and the others back by around 30 m. Yi Xian spoke via voice transmission. "All of you return to Wuyuan right now." Lian Wanli gazed at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "Listen to me." Lian Wanli and the other two looked at each other. Without hesitation, the three of them turned around and left. After the three left, Yi Xian looked up at the sky. "This is a supreme treasure of the universe. I, Yi Xian, do not have the fortune to enjoy it. Today, I will give it to all of you. The treasures of heaven and earth belong to the virtuous." With that, he turned around and disappeared. No one chased after Yi Xian. Even Li Xianfeng ignored Yi Xian. The gazes of everyone had converged onto the World Prison Pagoda. They did not suspect that Yi Xian was faking it, because they could sense that this World Prison Pagoda was extraordinary. Although everyone knew that this was a treasure of the world, it was strangely quiet at this moment. No one made a move. The atmosphere was very strange. In the dark, Qin Shan, who was next to He Liantian, was confused. What game is that Yi Xian playing? Could it be that he really knows how to adapt to circumstances? He Liantian shook his head. "I don't understand." Qin Shan said solemnly, "Should we fight for it?" He Liantian shook his head once more. Qin Shan was confused. "Why?" He Liantian said softly. "So what if we get it? Do you think you'll be invincible if you succeed?" Qin Shan said in a deep voice. "This item is not simple. If we obtain it, Heliantendo. Disaster. If we get it, it will bring disaster to Wuyuan. Don't talk too much, just wait and see." Qin Shan nodded and said nothing else. Not too far away, Yilan suddenly broke the silence. "Brother Li, does your sword sect also want this item?" Li Xianfeng looked at Yilan and smiled. "Truth be told, this is the sword sect's lost item." Yilan did not get angry. Instead he laughed. "Sect Master Li, it's rare to see someone as thick-skinned as you," Li Xianfeng said indifferently. "Everyone, this is Divine Martial City." Yilan narrowed his eyes. "Sect Master Li, are you? If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Are you threatening us?" Li Xianfeng shook his head and smiled. "Of course not. Brother Yilan, Yi Xian is a traitor of the sword sect. This item is also a lost item of the sword sect. Don't you think it's a little unreasonable for you to try and take it by force?" Yilan sneered. "An item of the sword sect? Sect Master Li, the old man has now realized that your skin is extraordinarily thick. Don't talk to this old man about these useless things. If you want this treasure, you'll have to defeat the old man and the others." He was about to make his move when an elderly man carrying a sword suddenly appeared behind Li Xianfeng. Apart from him, there was also a burly man carrying a sword on his back, who appeared not too far behind Yilan and the others. "Three swordsmen. Yi Lan narrowed his eyes and the corners of his lips curled into a sneer. With just the three of you? Li Xianfeng smiled. Keep watching. Just as Li Xianfeng had spoken, two black-robed men suddenly appeared on his right. Each of them held a sheathed black sword in their hands. Apart from that, they also carried a black sword case on their backs. Two Dao State swordsmen. Yi Lan's expression sank at the sight of this. 5 swordsmen against 5 of us. We have no advantage at all. Besides, this is the sword sect. The sword sect must have a trump card. After all, the sword sect's legacy has been passed down for so many years. They can't possibly only have this little trump card. Yi Lan's expression was extremely ugly. Is the duck that's already in our mouths going to fly away just like that? Li Xianfeng smiled. Brother Yi Lan, do you still want to fight? Yi Lan glared coldly at Li Xianfeng. What a great sword sect. Very well, we'll meet again. He then turned around and left. Soon, Yi Lan and the others disappeared from sight. They cannot fight. If the 5 of them were to fight, there was a high chance that the sword sect would make them stay here forever. After all, the swordsmen were extremely powerful to begin with. On top of that, this was the sword sect's territory. They had no chance of winning here. The old man next to Li Xianfeng said in a deep voice. They won't let this go so easily. Li Xianfeng replied coldly. What's there to be afraid of? He then turned to look at He Liantian. Brother He, you don't have any other plans, do you? He Liantian stepped forward and smiled. I don't have any other plans. Congratulations on obtaining the universe's #1 treasure. Li Xianfeng glanced at He Liantian and smiled. Thank you. Then he grabbed the World Prism Pagoda with his right hand and disappeared. Soon, all the sword sect's experts left. He Liantian frowned as he looked at the sword sect. No one knew what he was thinking. Qin Shan said in a deep voice. They got it just like that? He Liantian shook his head. It's not that simple. Qin Shan smiled bitterly. They have already obtained it. If they obtain its power at that time, are Wu Yuan? He Liantian suddenly asked. What do you think of Yi Xian? Qin Shan was slightly startled, then asked. What do you mean? He Liantian said softly. Intelligence. Qin Shan said in a deep voice. He's not stupid. He Liantian said softly. That's it. From his information, not only is he not stupid, but he's also very cunning. No matter what, let's wait and see. Then he turned around and left. Qin Shan glanced at the sword sect's direction, then turned around and left as well. In another corner, Baiji quietly looked at the sword sect. No one knew what she was thinking. When the battle started, Yi Xian told her to leave, so she was not injured. A moment later, this chapter is not finished, please continue. Baiji turned around and left. At the sword sect, after Li Xianfeng returned to the sword sect with the World Prism Pagoda, he immediately entered his own training room. Looking at the World Prism Pagoda, Li Xuanfeng's eyes were filled with passion. He was a Dao realm expert, but this treasure could still make him feel a powerful pressure. What did this mean? It meant that the level of this treasure was far beyond his realm. Rumor had it that this treasure was the only way to the 5th dimension, and the 5th dimension was a whole new universe, a whole new world. Li Xianfeng could not wait to subdue the pagoda in front of him. With the point of his finger, a drop of essence blood fell on the World Prism Pagoda. The World Prism Pagoda trembled, and the next moment, the World Prism Pagoda suddenly burst out with a dazzling black light. Li Xuanfeng's expression changed drastically, and the next moment, he was sent flying. At the same time, the entire training room turned into nothingness. A moment later, Li Xianfeng, who was not far away, stood up from the ground. At this moment, half of his body was destroyed. Li Xianfeng was stunned, then quickly reconstructed his body. For an expert of his level, regrowing a severed limb was undoubtedly a very simple matter. However, in the next moment he was stunned, because his body could not be restored. Eternal destruction. Li Xianfeng hurriedly tried a few more times, but he was still unable to restore his lost body. As if he had thought of something, Li Xianfeng hurriedly looked towards the World Prism Pagoda. However, it was completely empty. He ran. Li Xianfeng was stunned for a moment, and then his expression instantly became ferocious. as he roared furiously like a wild beast. No, no. At this moment, his face had lost its previous composure, and there was only ferociousness and madness. He ran. Meanwhile, the old man and the others appeared by Li Xuanfeng's side, and they were stunned when they saw Li Xianfeng. Li Xianfeng suddenly roared furiously. Find him. Use everything we have to find Yi Xian. We must find him. The old man and the others exchanged glances, and then they turned around and left. Li Xuanfeng's expression was so ferocious that his features were twisted. No, he only had half his face right now. Yi Xian. A roar resounded from the sword once more. Yi Xian sat cross-legged in a certain courtyard within Divine Martial City, and was healing himself. At this moment, his face was pale as a sheet, and his entire body was covered in cracks. Moreover, his clothes were dyed red with blood. Utilizing the dragon soul and dragon energy from before had consumed too much of his energy. If he were to continue fighting, then he wouldn't even have to die. Even though the dragon soul and dragon energy were good, they were too strong, and his body couldn't endure it right now. He madly devoured immortal crystals. As energy surged endlessly into his body, Yi Xian's body started to absorb it madly, and his complexion gradually became better. Yi Xian heaved a sigh of relief when he noticed this. It's good that I can recover. Suddenly, the space in front of him collapsed. Yi Xian was shocked, and he was about to attack when a black object appeared in front of him. Yi Xian's expression instantly became strange when he saw it. The World Prism Pagoda. The pagoda in front of Yi Xian trembled slightly, and then it transformed into a ray of black light that entered the center of his forehead. Yi Xian's body trembled, and then he shook his head and sighed. What exactly do you like about me? I'll change, all right? End of this chapter. Chapter 533. Prism Pagoda. The reason why Yi Xian dared to give the Prism Pagoda to Li Xianfeng and the others was because he knew that Li Xianfeng and the others could not control the Prism Pagoda. As he expected, the pagoda came back. What made him depressed was that he couldn't get rid of the pagoda, even if he wanted to. It was completely dependent on him, and it didn't help him fight. As if knowing what Yi Xian was thinking, the sixth person suddenly said, You've gotten the best of us, but you're still pretending to be innocent. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Senior, this pagoda is really a disaster. From the firmament world to here, he hadn't had a single day of peace, and the biggest reason was this pagoda. The sixth person said, But have you ever thought that this pagoda will also bring you endless opportunities? Yi Xian nodded. I understand that. The sixth person said, Actually, the pagoda is already giving you face by cooperating with you. When it first met me, it didn't say a word and immediately started fighting. Yi Xian smiled, then asked, Senior, you all said that this thing is from the fifth dimension, so why did it come to the fourth dimension? The sixth person said, You're asking me, but who should I ask? Yi Xian. The sixth person said, Regardless of why it chose you, you only need to understand one thing, and that is that it can't leave you. Since it can't leave you, you can communicate with it. Yi Xian frowned. Senior, you said it can't leave me, why is that? The sixth person said, It's in a heavily injured state. It knows very well that it can't suppress the beings imprisoned in the pagoda, such as me. If it wasn't for that swordsman, I would have come out. And if I come out, and it's in a heavily injured state, I'll definitely kill it. After being imprisoned for so many years, it's not too much for me to have this thought, right? Yi Xian smiled sheepishly. It's not too much. The sixth person said, Apart from that, it has external enemies. This external enemy is a peak expert of the fourth dimension. For example, an expert on the same level as the fifth floor. If it fell into the hands of such a person, it would not be as comfortable as it is now. When he spoke up to hear, he paused for a moment before he continued. On the other hand, being with you is equivalent to having two more backers. Yi Xian asked, The plain-dressed woman and the swordsman? The sixth replied, What else? Yi Xian was speechless. The sixth replied, Moreover, you will help it search for the Tao rules, so that it can heal its wounds in peace. In other words, following you is killing two birds with one stone. Yi Xian was speechless. The sixth person continued, however, you can also use it. For example, if it didn't cooperate with you, you wouldn't have been able to escape. Yi Xian nodded. That's true. Cooperation. Right now, he could only cooperate with the prison pagoda, each taking what they needed. Although the World Prison Pagoda had recognized him as its master, he had never considered himself to be its master. After all, the power of the pagoda far surpassed his own. Healing. After chatting with the sixth person for a while, he continued to heal his wounds. What he needed to do now was to ensure that he was in peak condition at all times. 2 hours later, Yi Xian left the courtyard and stealthily came to Wuyuan. Right now, he was most worried about Yi Ling and the others, because he was afraid that after he went into hiding, Li Xianfeng and the other Dao Realm experts would target Yi Ling and the others. After stealthily coming to Wuyuan, Yi Xian found An Lanxiu and Lian Wanli. In the room, Lian Wanli glanced at Yi Xian. Why don't you leave this place? Leave? Yi Xian shook his head. If I leave, they will definitely target you at all costs. He was very clear that as long as he was here, those people would not come to Wuyuan for a life-and-death struggle. But once he left, those people would definitely come to Wuyuan for a life-and-death struggle. Because once he escaped, they could only find him through Yi Ling, An Lanxiu, and the others. Lian Wanli said, the dean said to let us stay here peacefully. Wuyuan won't let anyone touch us. Yi Xian looked at Lian Wanli. Do you believe it? Lian Wanli smiled. I only believe in my own strength. Yi Xian nodded. I still don't know how strong those forces are. Apart from them, Sword Sect, Star Lord, I'm afraid Wuyuan can't handle them. So I can't leave. And Lanxiu suddenly asked, what are your plans? Yi Xian smiled. I don't have any plans. I'm going to take it one step at a time. And Lanxiu nodded. Let us know if there's anything. Yi Xian smiled. Definitely. And Lanxiu asked again, do you want to see Yi Ling? Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Is she still in seclusion? And Lanxiu nodded. She doesn't know what's going on outside. The dean and the others are probably hiding it from her. Yi Xian nodded. That's fine as well. When he spoke up to hear, he hesitated for a moment and said, take me to see her. And Lanxiu stood up and left. Yi Xian followed behind An Lanxiu. However, he didn't show himself, so as not to cause unnecessary trouble. In next to no time, An Lanxiu led Yi Xian to a cave, and an old man stood before it. It was Qin Shan. Qin Shan gazed at An Lanxiu. And what are you doing here? And pointed at the cave. I'm here to see her. Qin Shan was about to speak, when He Liantian suddenly appeared in front of An Lanxiu. He glanced at An Lanxiu and said, go in. An Lanxiu nodded lightly. Thank you, Dean. As soon as she finished speaking, she walked into the cave. On the other hand, Yi Xian followed her in silently. As soon as he entered the cave, Yi Xian was stunned. Spirit energy. The spirit energy within this cave was so pure. It wasn't just pure, it was plentiful as well. It could be said that the spirit energy here was the purest he'd ever seen. Cultivating here would absolutely yield twice the results with half the effort. Not far away, on a stone platform, a little girl was sitting quietly. She was none other than Yi Ling. Meanwhile, Yi Ling suddenly opened her eyes, and a wisp of a smile instantly appeared on Yi Ling's face when she saw An Lanxiu. Big sister An. Yi Ling had always been extremely fond of An Lanxiu, because An Lanxiu had helped her and her older brother a great deal while they were in Qing City. An Lanxiu walked over to Yi Ling, and then she lightly rubbed Yi Ling's icy hair and smiled. Look who's here. She turned around as she spoke. On the other hand, Yi Xian had suddenly appeared behind An Lanxiu. Yi Ling was stunned when she saw Yi Xian, and then she pounced into Yi Xian's arms. She hugged Yi Xian tightly while her voice trembled slightly. Big brother. Big brother. In this young girl's heart, her older brother was the most important person in the world. Her older brother was her one and everything. Yi Xian rubbed Yi Ling's little head lightly. At this moment his heart was extremely tranquil, and there wasn't a trace of malice within him. Warmth. He felt warmth when he was with Yi Ling. An Lanxiu gazed at Yi Xian, and Yi Ling from the side. and she had rather complicated feelings in her heart. She had a better understanding of Yi Xian and Yi Ling, and she knew that Yi Ling and Yi Xian had depended on each other since they were young. The relationship between these two siblings was so deep that outsiders were unable to understand it. After a while, Yi Xian rubbed Yi Ling's little head lightly. "Where's Mother?" Yi Ling lifted her head to look at Yi Xian. "After Mother came here, she said she wanted to go somewhere, and then she left." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "Do you know where she went?" Yi Ling shook her head. "I don't know, but she told us not to worry about her, and that she won't be in danger." Yi Xian was silent. Where could she have gone? It would be a lie to say that he wasn't worried. Now that Dugu Xian was out there was no guarantee that the sword sect and other forces wouldn't look for her. He had to get Baiji to help him investigate. After Yi Xian made up his mind, he looked at Yi Ling. "You've reached the Sage Realm?" Yi Ling nodded her little head quickly and smiled. "Big brother, not only have I reached the Sage Realm, but I will soon reach the Manifestation Realm." The Manifestation Realm. Yi Xian was slightly shocked, and he looked at Enlancio. Enlancio spoke in a light voice. "There's no need to worry. The experts of Wuyuan are helping her stabilize her foundation." Yi Xian was slightly relieved when he heard this. He knew that Wuyuan would definitely not do something like spoiling a seedling through excessive enthusiasm. Enlancio continued. "Her natural talent is very good, but she's slightly lacking in combat. However, there seems to be an old man teaching her every day." "Grandpa Wu." Yi Ling spoke abruptly. "It's Grandpa Wu. He comes every day to teach me how to fight. He's very formidable." Yi Xian grinned. "Then you must learn well." "Got it." Yi Ling spoke seriously. "Big brother, I'll be very serious. If anything happens in the future, I'll help Big brother." Yi Ling had matured a lot since he left Qing City, and this maturity caused Yi Xian's heart to ache slightly. However, he knew that Yi Ling had to grow. Meanwhile, Enlancio gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian naturally understood what she meant, and he immediately said, "Ling cultivate well here. Big brother is going to cultivate as well." Yi Ling was stunned, and then she said, "Aren't you going to play a little longer?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "We'll have plenty of time in the future." Yi Ling asked another question. "Big brother, are you in Wuyuan as well?" Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he nodded. "Yes, cultivate well for now. Big brother will come look for you once you attain the Manifestation Realm." Yi Ling nodded slightly, and it was unknown what he was thinking. Yi Xian spoke in a light voice. "You're aware that Big brother has many enemies, so Big brother can't keep playing with you. You have to cultivate well as well. Listen to Grandpa Wu, work hard to become stronger, and then help Big brother, alright?" Yi Ling gazed at Yi Xian and said in a serious tone, "Big brother, I'll definitely be able to help you." Yi Xian smiled and said, "I'll be waiting." As soon as he finished speaking, he rubbed Yi Ling's little head and said, "Big brother is leaving." Yi Ling nodded. "I'll come look for you soon." Yi Xian smiled, and then he turned around and left with Enlancio. Even though he was reluctant to leave, he was very clearly aware that something would happen if he stayed here for too long. Wuyuan was already very kind, and he didn't want to drag Wuyuan down with him. Within the cave, Yi Ling just gazed at Yi Xian and Enlancio, and she didn't withdraw her gaze even after Yi Xian and Enlancio had vanished completely. Outside the cave, Yi Xian raised his head to look towards the horizon. He slowly clenched his right fist tightly as he spoke in a light voice. "I won't allow anyone to harm her again. Never." His younger sister. In this life, Yi Xian didn't seek immortality. He only wished for his sister and the people around him to be safe. At this moment, Baiji's voice suddenly came from the space in front of Yi Xian. "The sword sect is looking for you like crazy. You must be careful." The sword sect. Yi Xian's expression gradually turned cold. P.S. I've been checking for typos these few days. I've been reading almost line by line, but there are still typos. I want to find a girl to help me check. Is there anyone? Only check for typos, nothing else. Chapter 534. Enlancio, who stood by Yi Xian's side, asked, "What's wrong?" Yi Xian shook his head. It's nothing, let's go. And Lanxiu nodded lightly, and was about to leave with Yi Xian, when He Liantian suddenly appeared in front of her. And Lanxiu looked at He Liantian, and the latter said, I'll have a chat with him. And Lanxiu's face sank slightly. He Liantian smiled. Don't worry, my Wu Yuan won't harm him. And Lanxiu nodded lightly, and retreated to the side. At this time, Yi Xian didn't conceal himself anymore. He Liantian glanced at Yi Xian. The sword sect is mobilizing all its forces to track you down. What have you done? Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. What can I do? He naturally knew why the sword sect was pursuing him so crazily. It was naturally because of the World Prison Pagoda. He Liantian looked at Yi Xian. The sword sect is serious this time. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, could it be that they were acting against me earlier? He Liantian shook his head. They were worried earlier, so they didn't use the entire sect's strength to target you. But it's different now. They can be said to be using the entire sect's strength. Once you're found by them, you won't have a chance. Not a chance. Yi Xian fell silent. He Liantian continued. The sword sect has existed for so many years, and even I don't know how deep its foundation is. Yi Xian nodded. I'll be careful. He Liantian shook his head. Your best choice right now is to leave this place. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. If I leave this place, they'll definitely target Wu Yuan. He Liantian looked at Yi Xian. You can take this whirlpool elsewhere. Yi Xian understood when he heard this. Everyone's gazes would be fixed on him if he stayed here. And if he left, those forces would leave as well. Of course, after he left, he couldn't hide anymore. He had to keep stirring up trouble to attract the attention of those forces. In this way, the sword sect and those forces wouldn't target Wu Yuan. After all, their target was him, Yi Xian. Moreover, Wu Yuan was not a weakling. It was not a place that could be easily taken down. To put it simply, it was to attract firepower. He Liantian continued. Besides, you should stay in Divine Item City. This is the territory of the sword sect in Wu Yuan. Once you're discovered, the sword sect has many ways to punish you. Yi Xian nodded. I understand what you mean, Senior. Senior, don't worry. I will try my best not to implicate Wu Yuan. As for my sister and Shaoan, Heliantendo said, don't worry. As long as Wu Yuan doesn't collapse, they will be fine. Yi Xian nodded. Thank you. Senior, don't worry. I will do my best to make them target me. After saying that, he bowed slightly and left. And Lanxiu glanced at He Liantian, and quickly followed after Yi Xian. In the field, He Liantian looked at Yi Xian, who was leaving. No one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, Qin Shan appeared beside him. Can he survive? He Liantian said softly. That will depend on his luck. Qin Shan said in a deep voice. According to my investigation, Yiling has a deep relationship with him. Heliantendo said. Don't let her know what's going on outside. Qin Shan nodded. Understood. He Liantian looked in the direction of the sword sect, and was confused. Why is the sword sect searching for Yi Xian so crazily? At the entrance of Wu Yuan, and Lanxiu stopped and turned to look at a corner behind her. What did he say to you? In the dark, a voice sounded. Don't worry. I will be fine. Take care of yourself. Trust me. After saying that, Yi Xian disappeared. And Lanxiu frowned. A moment later, she turned to look in the direction of the sword sect. Her eyes gradually turned cold. After Yi Xian left Wu Yuan, he directly went out of the city. Where are you going? At this moment, the sixth floor suddenly asked. Where to? Yi Xian looked up at the horizon in a daze. Where can I go? Where should I go? After a while, Yi Xian's face gradually turned cold. Where to? I'm not going anywhere. Yi Xian turned and disappeared. At this moment, the sword sect of Shenwu City was searching for Yi Xian in a frenzy. It could be said that it was a carpet search. However, Yi Xian seemed to have vanished from the face of the earth. At the entrance of Wu Yuan, several sword lights landed on the ground. When the sword lights dispersed, Li Xianfeng appeared. Behind him was an old man with a sword and a burly man with a sword on his back. As soon as Li Xianfeng appeared, He Liantian appeared in front of him. When he saw Li Xianfeng, He Liantian frowned. This was because Li Xianfeng was covered in a black robe. Only half of his face could be seen. The other half was covered by a black mask. Li Xianfeng looked at He Liantian coldly. He Liantian, I want that Yi Ling, He Liantian chuckled. Li Xianfeng, do you think this is your Wu Yuan? Li Xuanfeng's eyes turned ferocious. If you don't hand over Yi Ling, then we will fight to the death. Fight to the death. He Liantian sneered. Fight to the death. Do you think my Wu Yuan is afraid of you? As his voice fell, Qin Shan appeared behind He Liantian. Other than Qin Shan, there were 3 other old men. All 3 of them were Dao realm experts. Li Xianfeng stared at He Liantian. Do you think your Wu Yuan can protect her? He Liantian looked at Li Xianfeng. Li Xianfeng, don't you think for your sword sect? If you continue to act like this, your sword sect won't have a good ending. Li Xianfeng said coldly. Wu Yuan doesn't need to worry about that. Since your Wu Yuan isn't willing to hand over Yi Ling, then my sword sect will declare war on your Wu Yuan. We will fight to the death. As soon as he finished speaking, he left with the old man and the others. A declaration of war. In the battlefield, He Liantian slowly clenched his right fist. The sword sect declared war on Wu Yuan. The news spread throughout Xinwu City in an instant. The sword sect and martial institution could be said to have lived in harmony for thousands of years in divine martial city. During these thousands of years, even though both sides had some small conflicts, there had never been a formal declaration of war like this. Moreover, everyone in the city knew that the relationship between Xinwu City and the sword sect's founding ancestor wasn't ordinary. With the sword sect's declaration of war, the entire Xinwu City suddenly became tense. Because the entire city was jointly owned by Wu Yuan and the sword sect, some forces in the city either attached themselves to the sword sect or Wu Yuan. Now that the sword sect had declared war, these forces naturally became enemies. Chaos. With the sword sect's declaration of war, the entire Xinwu City started to fall into chaos. In the past, when the sword sect's disciples encountered the Wu Yuan students, they would at most provoke them or exchange a few blows. But now, once they encountered each other, it would be a fight to the death. Besides that, in Xinwu City, a team of 10 sword sect's disciples was madly searching for Wu Yuan students in the city. Once they saw them, they would kill them. Soon, Wu Yuan started to fight back Wu Yuan. He Liantian stood in front of the statue, in front of the martial arts hall. He looked at the statue and said softly, Founding ancestor, you once said that Wu Yuan's sword sect has been on good terms for generations. Now that the sword sect has provoked a war, Wu Yuan has no choice but to accept. After saying that, he turned around. In front of him were Enlanxio, Lian Wanli, Emosia, and a young man. This young man was the other monster of Wu Yuan, Xiaochen. Before Emosia and the others arrived, he was already the #1 monster of Wu Yuan. He Liantian said in a deep voice, The 4 of you are the 4 most outstanding people of Wu Yuan. Now that the sword sect has declared war on Wu Yuan, we are not only competing with the high-level forces, but also the low-level forces. From now on, the 4 of you will bring Wu Yuan students out of the hospital. Anyone who sees the sword sect's disciples, kill them without mercy. Xiao Chun, who was next to Emosia, suddenly asked, Master, is there no room for negotiation? He Liantian looked at Xiao Chun. Now that the sword sect has attacked us, what else do we need to negotiate with them? Our Wu Yuan is not willing to start a war, but we are never afraid of war. If the sword sect wants to fight, we will fight with them. Xiao Chun nodded slightly. Understood. Soon, Enlanxio and the others turned around and left. After Enlanxio and the others left, He Liantian said softly, You and the others protect them in the dark. As the voice faded, someone in the dark quietly retreated. He Liantian turned around and left. Outside Xinwu City, an old man in black looked coldly in the direction of Xinwu City. This person was the old man in black, Yi Lan, who had left Xinwu City. Behind him, there were 4 more people. All 4 of them were Dao realm experts. They were about to get their hands on the supreme treasure, but it was taken by the sword sect. Of course, they would not let it go. At this time, a man in black suddenly appeared in front of Yi Lan. Yi Lan whispered a few words, then left quietly. Yi Lan suddenly sneered. What a great sword sect, haha. A Dao realm expert next to Yilan asked. What's wrong? Yilan sneered. The sword sect declared war on Wu Yuan. The Dao realm expert was stunned, then said, the heavens are really helping us. Are we going to take action? Yilan shook his head. Let them fight first. When both sides are injured, we will annihilate the sword sect in one fell swoop. The Dao realm expert nodded. All right. Then Yi Xian. Yilan replied in a calm voice. Don't worry about him. The treasure is not with him. He is of no use to us. Saying so, he looked in the direction of Shenwu City. I want to see if this Li Xianfeng and the sword sect can protect that supreme treasure. Speaking up to this point, he seemed to have thought of something and asked again. Is there any movement from the Star Lord? The Dao realm expert shook his head. There is no movement for now. Yilan said solemnly. He will not give up on the treasure. We need to be careful of this person. The Dao realm expert nodded. Understood. However, if he really wants to take action, I'm afraid we can't stop him. The Star Lord. That is the true supreme expert of this world. Yilan said indifferently. Don't worry, someone will deal with him. Speaking up to this point, his expression suddenly changed. He looked to the right. Who? Not far from the right, a man quietly appeared. This person is Yi Xian. Seeing Yi Xian, Yilan narrowed his eyes. Yi Xian. Yi Xian walked in front of Yilan and the others. Greetings, everyone. Yilan stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, we don't want to tangle with you. He was still a little afraid of Yi Xian. This guy had killed a Dao realm expert in an instant. Previously, he had made an enemy out of Yi Xian because Yi Xian had a treasure. But now Yi Xian no longer had that treasure. Hence, he no longer wanted to tangle with Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, I want to join forces with you. Yilan frowned. Join forces? Yi Xian nodded. Join forces. His expression turned ferocious. Not only did the sword sect steal my treasure, they even slandered me, saying that I stole their treasure. Not only that, they even kidnapped my sister to threaten me. How can I, Yi Xian, tolerate this? He then looked at Yilan. I don't want that treasure. I just want to destroy the sword sect. As for you, protect me. Don't let their Dao realm experts gang up on me. What do you think? Yilan glanced at Yi Xian. You don't want that treasure? Are you serious? Yi Xian replied seriously. We swordsmen never lie. Chapter 535. In the field, Yilan just stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's expression was calm, and he did not say a word. After a while, Yilan asked, Yi Xian, are you really willing to give up on that treasure? Yi Xian smiled. I'm not willing, but what else can I do? Now that I have that treasure, only death awaits me, don't you think so? Yilan calmly replied. You seem to understand. Yi Xian replied in a low voice. I have no other request, I just want to destroy the sword sect. Yilan fell silent for a moment before he replied. We can work together. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Yilan added. However, you'd better not play any tricks. Yi Xian replied. Don't worry. As long as you don't play any tricks, I, Yi Xian, will never play any tricks. Yilan looked at Yi Xian. You said we should work together. How do we work together? Yi Xian looked at Shenwu City. Now we'll attack first and catch the sword sect off guard. Yilan calmly replied. Isn't it better to let them kill each other now? Yi Xian said with a smile. Your Excellency, have you seen the experts in the Dao realm fighting? Yilan frowned. Yi Xian continued. Inside Shenwu City, it's only the juniors from the sword sect and Wu Yuan who are fighting amongst themselves. Their Dao state cultivators have yet to make a move. Don't you think that's strange? Yilan looked at Yi Xian. Just tell me. Yi Xian replied in a low voice. Think about it. The sword sect has already obtained that treasure. Why would they still want to declare war on Wu Yuan? Yilan narrowed his eyes. Are you saying that they have other motives? Of course. Yi Xian walked towards Yilan and spoke in a serious tone. If my guess is correct, they're putting on a show for you. Yilan stared fixedly in the direction of Divine Martial City. Moments later his pupil shrank. They might be trying to move that treasure or subdue it. Yi Xian quickly said, Yes, that supreme treasure was a divine item. Even Li Xianfeng wouldn't be able to subdue it in a short period of time. What they lacked now was time. Once Li Xianfeng subdued that treasure, at that time, the sword sect's family treasure. I don't even dare to think about it. Hearing this, Yi Lan's expression instantly turned gloomy. As if remembering something, he turned towards Yi Xian. You didn't subdue that treasure? Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Do you think I can subdue that treasure with my strength? As he spoke, he turned to look in the direction of the sword sect. We don't have much time left. Once Li Xianfeng subdues that treasure, he'll be invincible, and all of us will die. Yi Lan looked in the direction of Divine Martial City hesitantly. He did not really trust Yi Xian. He was still on guard against Yi Xian. Just then, Yi Xian suddenly asked, Do you know how I was able to kill a Dao realm cultivator in an instant? Yi Lan looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. It's because of that treasure. Furthermore, I've borrowed the power of that treasure, so I have the power to kill a Dao realm cultivator in an instant. Once Li Xianfeng obtains that treasure, not to mention all of you, even the Star Lord's true body will be instantly killed by him. Yi Lan fell silent. At this moment, a Dao realm cultivator next to him sent a voice transmission. This man may be selfish, but his words can be trusted. No matter what, we can't let Li Xianfeng subdue that treasure. Yi Lan nodded and looked at Yi Xian. What about you if we make a move? Yi Xian replied in a low voice. I'll assassinate him in secret. Assassinate? Yi Lan's eyelids twitched. He was well aware of Yi Xian's abilities, especially Yi Xian's flying sword. In a head-on battle, the flying sword was not particularly scary, but if Yi Xian were to hide in the dark and attack from time to time, it was enough to make one's scalp go numb. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, Let's not waste any more time. Shall we act? Yi Lan nodded. You'll look for an opportunity to kill the sword sect's Dao realm cultivators in one strike. Especially that Li Xianfeng, if possible kill him first. Yi Xian nodded. Everyone, I'll be waiting for all of you in the city. Having said that, he disappeared silently. After Yi Xian left, the Dao realm cultivator next to Yi Lan said in a low voice, We need to be careful of this person. Yi Lan nodded. If he really only wants revenge and doesn't want that treasure, then there's no need for us to be enemies with him. If he has other thoughts. At this point, a cold killing intent flashed in his eyes. I hope he's smarter and doesn't do anything stupid. Let's go. With that, the few of them disappeared silently. Shimwu City Sword Sect. In the main hall, Li Xianfeng sat quietly with a sword in front of him. At this moment, a man in black suddenly appeared in the hall. Li Xianfeng opened his eyes. Did you find him? The man in black shook his head. Sect Master, that Yi Xian seems to have disappeared from the world. Trash. Li Xianfeng suddenly said angrily. My sword sect can't even find a single person. The man in black lowered his head, not daring to speak. Li Xianfeng stood up and walked to the door. Half of his face was extremely ferocious. Yi Xian. Right now, he wasn't thinking about that treasure. He was thinking about how to kill Yi Xian. Destroying half of his body had a huge impact on him. If he couldn't recover his body, he would never be able to advance in this lifetime. At this time, Li Xianfeng said, Continue to search, we must find him. The man in black nodded and quickly retreated. At this time, several powerful forces suddenly appeared in the sky above the sword sect. Seeing this, Li Xianfeng's face changed greatly. He soared into the sky, and the moment he flew out, several powerful forces directly blasted down from the sky. In an instant, boom, boom, boom. The entire sword sect began to shake violently. Countless dust and smoke rose into the sky, and some of the main halls of the sword sect were instantly turned into dust. Enemy attack! A voice suddenly rang out from within the sword sect, and soon, several sword rays soared into the sky. In the sky, Li Xianfeng appeared in front of Yi Lan, and when he saw it was Yi Lan, he snarled, Yi Lan, are you crazy? Yi Lan said indifferently, Li Xianfeng, we meet again. Li Xianfeng stared at Yi Lan. That treasure is not in my hands. Yi Lan said angrily, Li Xianfeng, are you trying to grind the old man's IQ to the ground? Li Xianfeng wanted to say something, But Yilan suddenly disappeared. Li Xuanfeng's expression changed, and he quickly said, "Meet the enemy." As soon as Li Xuanfeng's voice fell, 6 Dao Realm swordsmen suddenly appeared. But Yilan and the others were not afraid at all, because they had a total of 10 Dao Realm experts on their side. 10. This time they were naturally well prepared. Soon the battle began. In the clouds above the sword sect, 2 old men were facing off. The old man on the right wore a linen robe and held a sheathed longsword in his hand. This man was the previous sect leader of the sword sect, Mu Fengchen. Opposite Mu Fengchen was an old man holding a spear. The old man was thin, with a head of white hair and a face full of wrinkles, but his eyes were as sharp as a knife. Mu Fengchen was expressionless. "Who gave you the guts to offend my sword sect?" The old man stroked his beard and smiled. "Don't scare the old man. Since the old man dared to come, why would I be afraid of your sword sect?" Mu Fengchen looked at the old man, but did not speak. Instead, he slowly walked towards the old man, and with every step he took, a powerful sword aura condensed in front of him. From afar the old man laughed. "Come, let the old man have a taste of the legendary sword saint." As soon as he finished speaking, he stomped his right foot. Chi! A glint of light flashed in the air. As soon as the glint of light appeared, the sky above the sword sect suddenly darkened. At that moment, the space above the sword sect had collapsed. In the instant that the spear-wielding elder attacked, Mu Fengchen suddenly unsheathed his sword. Buzz! The cry of a sword suddenly shook the sky. Rumble! Soon, a series of earth-shattering explosions came from the sky above the sword sect. The sword sect was also in the midst of a great battle. Li Xianfeng was fighting Yilan. Even though half of Li Xuanfeng's body had been destroyed, he was still very powerful. The Dao Realm cultivators of the sword sect were also blocking Yilan and the others. Rumble! At this moment, an explosion sounded in the sky, causing Yilan and Li Xianfeng to retreat. After Li Xianfeng stopped, he glared angrily at Yilan. "Yilan, the treasure is not with me." Yilan sneered. "If it's not with you, is it with Yi Xian?" Li Xianfeng replied. "It's with him." Yilan's expression turned ferocious. "Do you really think that the old man is an idiot?" Li Xianfeng wanted to say something, but Yilan suddenly disappeared. Li Xuanfeng's expression changed, and he hurriedly stabbed with his sword. Chi! The sword flashed and the space cracked. Boom! The two collided once again and separated. Li Xianfeng had just stopped, and was about to speak when his pupils suddenly shrank. He turned around and slashed with his sword. Bang! A figure was instantly sent flying. There was a sword in between Li Xuanfeng's brows. However, the sword did not stab into Li Xuanfeng's body, because it was blocked by a small golden shield the size of a palm. Not far away, Yi Xian's expression was dark. He did not expect Li Xianfeng to have such a defensive treasure. That small golden shield was at least at the manifestation state. When he saw Yi Xian, Li Xuanfeng's expression instantly turned ferocious. "Yi Xian, it's you. You." At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly pointed at Li Xianfeng angrily. "Old Dogly, give me back my treasure." Li Xianfeng was enraged. He was about to speak when Yilan suddenly charged at him from behind. Li Xianfeng did not dare to be careless. He hurriedly turned around and stabbed with his sword. With this stab, countless sword rays shot out like raindrops. By this time, Yi Xian had already disappeared. Boom boom boom. Almost 20 Dao Realm experts were fighting in the sword sect. How terrifying was the power of 20 people. At this moment, the space in the sky above the sword sect was trembling violently, and it was ceaselessly cracking apart. On the other hand, countless mountains in the surroundings of the sword sect had collapsed layer by layer. At this moment, the sword sect could be said to be in a mess in the air. After Li Xianfeng forced Yilan back, he roared, "Yilan, you stupid dog! The treasure is not in my hands. You've been tricked by Yi Xian." Not far away, Yilan clenched his right hand. His eyes were cold. "Li Xianfeng, can you change your trick to a better one?" As he spoke, he looked around. "Yi Xian, go kill the others. The old man will block him for you." "Thank you." In the dark, Yi Xian's voice rang out. "Li Xianfeng. P.S. I welcome everyone's criticism. I've read the reviews. If you think my writing is not good, you can complain. Only with criticism can I improve. Of course, I hope to hear praise. Nothing would make me happier than receiving your approval. You all hope that I can write better and more. I also hope that I can write better because I'm still poor. I can't be arrogant. Only when I write well will the readers be satisfied. That's why I've always wanted to be popular. Once I'm popular, I won't have to worry about these things anymore. Unfortunately, after a few years, I'm still half dead. Sweat. I'm ashamed. Finally, to be honest, having readers to spur us on is a good thing for us writers. However, I also hope that when you complain, don't bring your family into it. Finally, thank you for your support. Whether you read the pirated version or the original version, thank you for your support. Of course, I hope that you all read the original version. Time to write. Chapter 536. Yi Xian no longer targeted Li Xianfeng, because Li Xianfeng had that manifestation realm defensive treasure. If he wanted to kill Li Xianfeng, it would waste too much energy. Yi Lan also noticed this, which was why he gave up on Li Xianfeng. A few breaths after Yi Xian disappeared, Li Xianfeng suddenly turned to the right. There, a sword ray suddenly pierced the head of a Dao realm expert from the sword sect. Seeing this, Li Xuanfeng's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Soul run! However, the Dao realm swordsman couldn't move at all. He just stared into the distance, his eyes filled with disbelief. Soul fixation sword. Yi Xian's sword was a soul fixation sword. Therefore, the swordsman's soul was already fixed in his body. He couldn't escape at all. Li Xianfeng wanted to say something, but at this moment, a sword ray suddenly flashed behind the swordsman. In the next moment, the Dao realm swordsman's head was sent flying. Blood spurted out like a fountain. No! Li Xuanfeng's face instantly turned ferocious. A Dao realm swordsman. To nurture a Dao realm swordsman, not only did it require a huge amount of resources, it also required time. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least 500 years for a Dao realm swordsman to be born. Therefore, sacrificing a Dao realm swordsman was an inestimable loss for the sword sect. Not far away, Yi Lan's expression was also somewhat solemn. If he had to fight Yi Xian head-on, he wasn't afraid. Even if Yi Xian used those trump cards, he wasn't afraid. As long as he didn't underestimate Yi Xian and went all out, it was almost impossible for Yi Xian to kill him. However, if Yi Xian were to launch a sneak attack like this, then it would not be a normal kind of horror. At this moment he rejoiced slightly, rejoiced that he had cooperated with Yi Xian. Otherwise, if Yi Xian were to play tricks while they were fighting against the sword sect, and if he didn't have a defensive treasure at the creation stage, then even he wouldn't have the confidence to block Yi Xian's sword. Fear. Be on guard. At this moment, not only did Yi Lan's heart fill with fear, he also became more cautious. They were wary of Yi Xian. In front of Yi Lan, Li Xianfeng returned to his senses and roared angrily. Everyone stick together. Hearing Li Xuanfeng's words, the remaining sword sect's Dao realm experts started to gather together. At this moment, they'd noticed that the Dao realm swordsman had been killed, and they were slightly panicked. Was Yi Xian a swordsman or a killer? Li Xianfeng turned to look at Yi Lan with an incomparably ferocious expression. He no longer had his usual composure. Old doggy, I've told you, that treasure isn't in my hands. If you don't leave now, don't blame me for being impolite. Yi Lan sneered. If it's not in your hands, do you think it's in mine? Li Xianfeng, the old man doesn't want to waste time with you. Hand over the treasure and we'll leave immediately. We won't interfere in your grudge with Yi Xian, but if you don't hand it over, today will be the end of the sword sect. Li Xuanfeng's expression turned ferocious. You? As he spoke, he turned to look down. Sword formation. As soon as he spoke, the ground of the sword sect suddenly split open, and a huge sword shot into the sky. As soon as the huge sword shot into the sky, a shapeless sword aura enveloped Yi Lan and the others. Besides that, 10 swords suddenly appeared in the sky above the sword sect. The 10 swords circled around, and rays of sword light enveloped the entire sword sect. Seeing this, Yi Lan's expression instantly turned solemn. At this moment, Li Xianfeng suddenly appeared in the center of the sword formation. In the next moment, he clasped his hands together. Annihilation of myriad swords. The swords in the sky suddenly transformed into rays of sword light that shot towards Yi Lan and the others. Yi Lan's expression changed drastically. Join forces. As soon as he spoke, 10 Dao Realm experts shot into the sky. Rumble. Rumble. Soon, the sky above the sword sect started to tremble violently, and countless rays of sword light shot out. In the dark, Yi Xian didn't make another move. After the Dao Realm experts gathered together, he didn't have a chance to attack. However, he didn't give up, and he was looking for an opportunity in the dark. Suddenly, Li Xianfeng looked at the Dao Realm swordsman from the sword sect. Attack! The Dao Realm experts nodded, and then numerous rays of sword light shot towards Yi Lan and the others. As soon as the sword sect's Dao Realm experts joined in, Yi Lan and the others were instantly suppressed. Moreover, Yi Lan, who led the group, had over a dozen sword marks on his body. A cold smile appeared on Li Xuanfeng's face. He was about to activate the sword formation again, when a Dao Realm swordsman nearby suddenly roared. No! As soon as he finished speaking, his head flew into the sky. Yi Xian! Li Xianfeng roared furiously, and his face distorted. The remaining Dao Realm experts' expressions changed drastically, and they didn't dare to attack again. All of them moved closer to each other. Yi Xian, who was hiding in the dark, was too great of a threat to them. As for Yi Lan and the others, they heaved a sigh of relief. If the Dao Realm swordsman didn't retreat, then they would be in a terrible situation. Suddenly, an old man with a spear appeared in front of Yi Lan and the others, and Mu Fengchen appeared in front of Li Xianfeng as well. The old man glanced at Mu Fengchen. Let's go. Yi Lan was slightly hesitant. Yuelao. The old man looked at Yi Lan. Let's go. With that, he turned and left. Yi Lan and the others didn't dare to stay any longer, and they turned and left. The reason they dared to attack the sword sect was precisely because of Elder Yu's existence. Because the sword sect had a sword saint, and if there was no one to keep the sword saint busy, then all of them who were Dao Realm experts would be giving their lives away. Seeing that Yi Lan and the others were about to leave, Li Xianfeng roared angrily. Want to leave? After them. Behind him, the sword sect's Dao Realm experts were about to give chase. But at this time, Mu Fengchen suddenly said, Stand down. Hearing Mu Fengchen's words, the sword sect's Dao Realm experts all stopped. Li Xianfeng looked at Mu Fengchen puzzled. Master. Mu Fengchen looked at Li Xianfeng and shook his head. You disappoint me. Li Xuanfeng's face changed. Master, what do you mean? Mu Fengchen said softly. As a sect master, you let your emotions affect your decisions. Let me ask you, declaring war on Wu Yuan, what did our sword sect get? Li Xianfeng said in a low voice. That Yi Ling is in Wu Yuan. Mu Fengchen said. Yi Xian is our sword sect's enemy. And you went to look for his sister? What will the world think of our sword sect? They will think that our sword sect is useless. As he spoke, he stared at Li Xianfeng. Do you think that you're useless? Hearing this, Li Xuanfeng's face turned ugly. Mu Fengchen shook his head. Our sword sect wants to walk out of this place, to shake the world. However, our sword sect's reputation is equally important. A swordsman who doesn't think about using his sword to defeat his opponent. Instead, he wants to capture his sister to force his hand. Is that still a swordsman? No, such a person is not fit to be a swordsman. Furthermore, it's not just useless, it's shameless. Li Xuanfeng's face turned even uglier. Mu Fengchen continued. The current you has been overwhelmed by rage. You're not fit to be the leader of the sword sect. Sect master, from now on, I will be the temporary sect master of the sword sect. Li Xuanfeng's face was pale as a sheet. Master, Mu Fengchen said, go back and reflect on yourself. After a moment of silence, Li Xianfeng turned and left. Mu Fengchen looked around and shook his head. They did not expect Yi Lan's group to attack the sword sect so suddenly. For so many years, the sword sect had been at peace for too long. No force had ever openly attacked the sword sect. It was precisely because of this that the sword sect had suffered a huge loss. They lost 2 Dao swordsmen. This was a huge blow to the sword sect. Mu Fengchen suddenly said, "Pass down my order. All swordsman disciples in the city are to return to the sect and stop fighting with Wu Yuan." Behind Mu Fengchen, a Dao swordsman quietly retreated. Mu Fengchen said again, "Be careful of Yi Xian." A Dao swordsman said solemnly, "Old sect leader Mu, if Yi Xian is still in the dark, Mu Fengchen said softly, "I will find a way to force him to show himself. All of you stay in the sword sect. With me around, he won't dare to show himself." Having said that, he quietly disappeared. In the field, the swordsmen exchanged looks with a trace of helplessness in their eyes. They did not expect things to develop to this extent. The loss was too great. In a certain cave, Li Xianfeng sat on the ground with the sword floating in front of him. Behind the sword was a statue, the statue of the sword sect's ancestral founder. At this moment, Mu Fengchen appeared in front of Li Xianfeng. Mu Fengchen said indifferently, "Now, our sword sect has enemies on all sides. Not only that, but we also have not obtained that treasure. The world thinks that the treasure is in our sword sect, so those flies will crazily come to our sword sect." Li Xianfeng opened his eyes. "I've miscalculated," Mu Fengchen continued. "Initially, my sword sect was in an advantageous position. But because of your greed, my sword sect is in an absolute disadvantage." Li Xianfeng shook his head. "I never expected that the treasure would flee by itself." Mu Fengchen looked at Li Xianfeng and continued, "You did not hand it over to me the moment you obtained it, but tried to subdue it. However, you've underestimated it." Li Xianfeng fell into silence. Mu Chen said in a soft voice, "Greed is the original sin. This time, just treat it as a lesson." Li Xianfeng looked at Mu Fengchen and asked, "What about Yi Xian?" Mu Fengchen replied, "I will naturally think of a way to deal with him. Right now you just have to meditate here. Come out when you've figured it out." When he finished, he turned around and disappeared. Li Xianfeng fell into silence for a long time before he looked at the statue before him. The statue was of a young man, with a sword hanging by his waist. A brief moment later, Li Xianfeng walked up to the statue and looked at it with a cold gaze. "Back then you set the rule that the sword sect cannot leave the divine martial city. Do you know that my sword sect had many chances to dominate the world? But it was your bullshit rule that forced our sword sect to hide in the divine martial city." As he spoke, his expression turned sinister. "The strong rule is respected in this world, but you set this bullshit rule. You're the greatest sinner of my sword sect." When he finished speaking, he slashed down with his sword. Sizzle! The statue before him was split into two and fell to the ground. Chapter 537. Outside Shenwu City, in front of a pond. The spear-wielding elder, Yuelao, stood silently with his spear in hand. The spear in his hand was very ordinary. It was just a simple metal spear. Not far from Yuelao was Yilan. At this moment, Yilan still had many sword wounds on his body. Yilan said in a low voice, "We've underestimated the sword sect." As far as he was concerned, it shouldn't be a problem for them to take down the sword sect with Elder Yuelao's help when they launched a large-scale attack on the sword sect. However, he didn't expect that not only did they fail to take down the sword sect, they were almost forced to stay in the sword sect. If it wasn't for Yi Xian, at least half of them would have stayed in the sword sect. Yi Xian. Thinking of this, Yilan looked around. Yi Xian, are you still here?" At this moment, Yi Xian appeared not too far away on the right. At this moment, Yi Xian's face was rather pale. Yi Xian glanced at the spear-wielding elder, Yuelao, and secretly raised his guard. This old man was definitely not someone he could fight against right now. Yuelao also looked at Yi Xian. After sizing up Yi Xian, he said softly, "You're that Yi Xian?" Yi Xian nodded. Yuelao nodded slightly. "You're not bad." As he spoke, he sized up Yi Xian again. "The old man is curious about something. I wonder if you could dispel it for the old man." Yi Xian said. "Senior, please speak," Yuelao said. "Although the items on the interstellar bounty board are not simple, according to what the old man knows, the treasure on you completely crushes the other items on the interstellar bounty board. Why would such a treasure be on you? Yi Xian said in a low voice. I don't know. Yuelao frowned slightly. Yi Xian said again. Since I was born, this item has been on me. Yuelao asked. Your parents left it behind? Yi Xian nodded. It was left behind by my mother. But it was given to him by my father. But my father? I don't know who he is. Yuelao fell into deep thought for a moment, before he looked at Yilan. The latter replied in a low voice. We haven't been able to find out his father's background. We don't have any information at all. Elder Yuelao looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian said softly, Senior, it doesn't matter how this pagoda came into my possession. It's no longer important. The pressing matter at hand is to seize this pagoda from the sword sect. Yuelao smiled and said, That item is yours. Yi Xian shook his head. Senior, please don't test me. This item has brought me endless disasters. If I continue to overestimate myself and possess this item, it would be equivalent to courting death. At this point he smiled bitterly. Although I'm a little reluctant, there's nothing I can do. Compared to treasures, life is more important, isn't it? Yuelao smiled and said, Young man, to be able to have such awareness, very good. Yi Xian said in a low voice. To tell you the truth, I only want revenge now. Not only did the sword sect slander me, they even wanted to make a move against my younger sister and friends. This is something that I can't tolerate. Yuelao thought for a moment, and then he said, That Mu Fengchen told me that the treasure isn't in the sword sect's possession. Yi Xian smiled and said, Senior, do you believe that? Yuelao looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Do you? Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. If I'm not wrong, then they'll definitely say that the treasure is still with me, Yi Xian. Is that right? Yuelao nodded. Yes. Yi Xian walked over to stand before Yuelao. Senior strength has probably surpassed the Dao realm. I'm standing before you right now, so you can search me. If that item is really with me, then I'm willing to die. Yuelao looked at Yi Xian, and in the next moment, his divine sense suddenly enveloped Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian was practically transparent before Yuelao. On the other hand, all the items within Yi Xian's spatial ring appeared in Yuelao's mind, without any reservation. After a short moment, Yuelao withdrew his divine sense, and he looked at Yi Xian with a deep frown on his face. Meanwhile, Yilan said in a low voice, Yuelao, this sword sect is filled with crafty and cunning people. Their words can't be trusted at all. Yuelao looked at Yilan, and Yilan said, Earlier, when Yi Xian handed over the treasure, that Li Xianfeng actually shamelessly said that the treasure belonged to his sword sect, and that Yi Xian stole it. None of these swordsmen can be trusted. Yuelao was silent. Yilan continued. Yuelao, think about it. After the treasure was taken away by the sword sect, how is Yi Xian going to steal it from the hands of so many experts from the sword sect? Are Li Xianfeng and that sword saint stupid? At this point his expression turned cold. If I'm not wrong, this is their stalling tactic. They hope that we'll place our focus on Yi Xian, and then they'll be able to subdue the treasure. Yuelao nodded slightly. I'm going back for a while. You guys stay here and wait for my news. Before I return, don't make a move. After saying that, he glanced at Yi Xian, then turned around and disappeared into the horizon. After Yuelao left, Yi Xian said in a low voice, Everyone, this sword sect's strength, Yilan sneered. Don't worry. Even though the sword sect is strong, we're not weak either. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. Li Xianfeng and the sword sect will definitely search for you. You must be careful. Right now, he has already treated Yi Xian as an ally. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. At this point, he hesitated for a moment before saying, I want to have a breakthrough. I wonder if you guys can protect me? A breakthrough? Yilan asked. A breakthrough to the Dharma breakthroughs? Yi Xian nodded. Yilan thought for a moment before replying, Sure. If Yi Xian was strong, it would be beneficial to them as well. Yi Xian nodded and said, This place isn't safe. Let's go somewhere else. After saying that, he turned around and left. Yilan and the others followed behind him. At this moment, a Dao realm expert next to Yi Lan, spoke to him through profound qi. Even though the sword sect can't be trusted, we can't completely trust this person either. Yi Lan replied calmly, "Of course I know that. However, it won't do us any harm if he becomes stronger now. Besides, with Yuelao around in the future, he won't be able to stir up any waves." The Dao realm expert thought for a moment before nodding. Indeed, it wouldn't do them any harm if Yi Xian became stronger now. This was because they now had a common enemy, the sword sect. With Yi Xian's help, it would be much easier for them to deal with the Dao realm experts of the sword sect. Soon Yi Xian and the others entered a mountain range. In the mountain range, Yi Xian found a quiet place, while Yi Lan and the others hid in the surroundings. Yi Xian was sitting cross-legged on the ground when a voice suddenly rang out from the 6th floor. "Do you trust them?" Yi Xian shook his head. Naturally, he wouldn't completely trust Yi Lan and the others, but he had no other choice. If he didn't improve now, he wouldn't have the time to do so in the future, and he had no choice but to improve, because his current level of strength was still not enough. He had to give it his all. Once he entered the Dharma realm, his strength would definitely increase greatly. When that time came, sneak attacks on Dao realm experts would be a piece of cake, and he would be able to protect himself. Of course, he didn't completely trust Yi Lan and the others. He had already called the Emperor Hound back into the World Prison Pagoda. Apart from that, Xiaoling was also on standby with the sword at the top of the pagoda. This was the Emperor Hound's suggestion, because Xiaoling's combat strength was actually very terrifying. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and calmed himself down. A moment later, Yi Xian took out an immortal weapon-grade sword and stabbed it into his abdomen. Boom! A powerful force spread out from Yi Xian's body. Soon, Yi Xian began to absorb this force in a frenzy. In the dark, Yi Lan looked down at Yi Xian quietly. No one knew what he was thinking. Next to Yi Lan, a Dao realm expert suddenly spoke to him through Xian Qi. "If we attack now," Yi Lan said calmly, "do you really think he trusts us that much? If I'm not mistaken, he must have something to rely on since he dared to increase his strength in front of us. If we attack and fight to the death with him, the sword sect will be the happiest." As he spoke, he withdrew his gaze and turned to look at the sword sect. "Right now the sword sect is our biggest enemy." The Dao realm expert nodded. Their goal in coming here was to obtain that precious treasure. Just like that, Yi Xian began to absorb the force in a frenzy, and the aura around him grew stronger. Fortunately, Yi Lan and the others had used a forbidden technique around him, so Yi Xian's aura did not leak out. To avoid unnecessary trouble, Yi Lan and the others also went into hiding. Wu Yuan, Heli and Tian sat in the main hall. Inside the hall, there were 6 Wu Yuan experts, 6 Dao realm experts. Besides them, Lanxiu, Emosia, Lian Wanli and Xiaochun were also here. Heli and Tendo said, "I'm sure you've heard about what happened to the sword sect." A middle-aged man walked out from below. "Now that the sword sect has suffered a great loss, I think we should hit them when they're down." "Hit them when they're down." Everyone looked at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man said calmly, "The sword sect is heartless. Why should we talk about morality with them?" An old man nodded. "Indeed, the sword sect has declared war on Wu Yuan, which shows their wild ambition. At a time like this, we Wu Yuan can't talk about morality with them." Heli and Tian looked at Emosia and the others. "What do you think?" Lian Wanli's lips curled up. "Fight." And Lanxiu nodded. "Fight." Emosia said, "Seniors, the sword sect's intentions are clear. If we talk about morality with them now, it's undoubtedly stupid. So I think we should fight. Not only do we have to fight, we have to beat them to death." Xiaochun said as well. "Brother Emosia is right. The sword sect has wild ambitions. If we give them the chance, they'll definitely attack us. So instead of waiting for them to make a move, why don't we take the initiative now?" As soon as he finished speaking, he looked at Heli and Tian. Everyone looked at Heli and Tian as well. However, Heli and Tian shook his head. "All of you underestimate the sword sect," Qin Shan said solemnly. "Sect leader, you mean that the sword sect has a trump card that no one knows about?" Heli and Tian nodded. The sword sect's founding ancestor didn't just leave a clone in the sword sect all those years ago. He even left behind a destructive sword formation. Besides that, the sword sect's founding ancestor would enter the sword sect's forbidden area, the sword tomb, when he or she falls. If we attack, then the best outcome would be for both sides to suffer heavy losses, and then others can reap the benefits. Qin Shan said solemnly. Are we going to give up just like that? Helian Tian stood up, walked to the entrance of the hall, and spoke softly. Wait. Wait for an opportunity, a chance to kill them with a single strike. Meanwhile, Qin Shan suddenly asked, how strong is the clone of the sword sect's founding ancestor? Helian Tian shook his head. I don't know. The strength of the sword sect's founding ancestor and Wu Yuan's founding ancestor was a mystery, because no matter if it was the sword sect or Wu Yuan, there was very little information about them. P.S. Seeking monthly votes. Chapter 538. In the dense forest. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, still absorbing energy at a crazy rate. Devouring sword. Right now, he was cultivating the cultivation technique that the plain-dress woman had left behind for him. And he had gradually discovered something special about this cultivation technique. He didn't understand it before, so he just needed to practice it. But now he realized that this cultivation method had transformed his body into a dantian. His entire body was now a dantian. Apart from that, his current physique had another special feature, which was that he could devour swords. Of course, the swords couldn't be of a lower grade than the soul-suppressing sword, and the opponent's strength couldn't be too much stronger than his. Right now, he didn't dare to face the Dao Realm Swordsman's sword head-on. If he didn't absorb it, he'd die. After all, his current realm was too low. However, even though he didn't dare to face the Dao Realm Swordsman's sword head-on, once his realm increased, he wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. Time passed bit by bit, and Yi Xian had devoured 10 immortal weapon swords. At this moment, his aura was at least several times stronger than before. In the dark, Yi Lan furrowed his brows. Because Yi Xian's aura was getting stronger and stronger, if this went on, he'd be exposed. After a moment of silence, Yi Lan said solemnly, Everyone, seal this place together, don't let his aura leak out. Behind him, the Dao Realm powerhouses nodded. Soon, they began to seal the space around Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly took out a fortune-grade sword and stabbed it into his abdomen. Boom! A powerful burst of energy instantly erupted from Yi Xian's body, and Yi Xian's body began to absorb the energy madly. At this moment, his aura skyrocketed like a volcanic eruption. In the dark, Yi Lan furrowed his brows again. Isn't it just breaking through to the Dharma realm? With such a big commotion, those who didn't know better would think that you're breaking through to the Dao realm. As he spoke, he reinforced the space around him again, not letting Yi Xian's aura leak out. With the joint efforts of several Dao realm experts to seal the space, although Yi Xian's aura was extremely strong, from the outside, there was not a single ripple in this place. After another hour, Yi Xian took out another sword of fortune and stabbed it into his abdomen. Then, he began to devour it frantically. At this moment, his body was like a vortex, crazily devouring the energy. After devouring, his aura grew stronger and stronger. In the dark, Yi Lan and the rest looked at each other with shock in their eyes. Because the aura on Yi Xian's body had already far surpassed the aura of a 10,000 laws realm powerhouse. An old man next to Yi Lan spoke in a deep voice. This person is not normal. Yi Lan gently nodded. This Yi Xian had really shocked him. Be it in terms of strength, or the increase in his cultivation level, he was clearly just trying to break through to the infinite Dharma realm. However, Yi Xian's aura was now close to the Saint realm. At this moment, the old man next to Yi Lan spoke in a low voice. If we were to become enemies then? Yi Lan shook his head. Right now, we have no conflict of interest with him. If he becomes stronger, it will be beneficial for us as well. The old man hesitated for a moment, but did not say anything. However, there was a trace of worry in his eyes. Yi Xian. If the current Yi Xian were to fight a Dao state cultivator head-on, Yi Xian would have a high chance of winning, especially after he had used all his trump cards. If he did not fight head-on, a Dao state cultivator would not be a match for him. If Yi Xian were to increase his cultivation level once again, Yi Xian's power would undoubtedly increase. Fear. It would be a lie to say that they were not afraid. Fortunately, as Yi Lan had said, Yi Xian was now on their side. If Yi Xian became stronger, it would be beneficial for them as well. The old man felt relieved at the thought of this, and stopped thinking about it. Just like that, the night passed. Just as the sky was about to brighten, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from Yi Xian's body. This aura was like a tsunami. As soon as it appeared, the surrounding space began to tremble violently. Yi Lan hurriedly said, "Suppress." As soon as Yi Lan had spoken, the surrounding Dao state cultivators joined forces to suppress the aura. Soon the trembling space gradually calmed down. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. Yi Lan appeared in front of Yi Xian, the Dharma realm? Yi Xian nodded and rose to his feet. A powerful aura once again rippled out from his body. However, it soon returned to his body. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes and clenched his fists. Power. At this moment his entire body was filled with power. It was different. It was completely different. Even though it was only a difference of one realm, his soul and every other aspect had been greatly improved, especially his mental strength and soul power. If he were to launch a sneak attack on a Dao state cultivator now, it would be extremely easy. Just then, Yi Lan's expression suddenly changed. He turned to look at the sky. Someone's coming. Just as he spoke, an old man appeared in front of the crowd. The person who had arrived was the previous sect master of the sword sect, Mu Fengchen. At this moment, Yi Xian had already disappeared. Mu Fengchen glared coldly at Yi Lan and the others. "Where's Yi Xian?" Yi Lan replied icily. "How would we know where he is?" Mu Fengchen narrowed his eyes. "Die." As soon as he spoke, he drew his sword and slashed. A dazzling ray of light from the sword slashed down from the sky. Yi Lan's expression changed greatly, and he threw a punch forward. Boom! As soon as the punch was thrown, Yi Lan's entire body was sent flying 100 feet back. By the time he stopped, his entire right arm was bleeding profusely. Yi Lan was about to attack again, when an old man suddenly appeared in front of Mu Fengchen. This person was Yuelao. Yuelao looked at Mu Fengchen and smiled. "Sect Master Mu, if your hands are itchy, how about I exchange a few blows with you?" Mu Fengchen looked at Yuelao expressionlessly. "Where's Yi Xian?" Yuelao smiled. "Where's Yi Xian? You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask?" Mu Fengchen glared at Yuelao. "Sect Master Mu, to be honest, we are determined to obtain that treasure. Forget about your sword sect. Even if your sword sect and Wu Yuan join forces, we will not give it up. Hand it over, and we will leave Shinwu Star Field immediately. Otherwise, your sword sect will never have peace. Hand it over, and we'll leave Divine Martial Star Region immediately. Otherwise, your sword sect will never have peace." Mu Fengchen narrowed his eyes. "Are you threatening me?" Yuelao nodded. "Yes." The sword in Mu Fengchen's hand began to tremble. Yuelao remained fearless, a faint smile still hanging on his face. Moments later, Mu Fengchen said, "I've told you before, that treasure is not with my sword sect." "Is that so?" "Not far away." Yi Lan suddenly sneered. "That day when Li Xianfeng snatched that treasure, we weren't blind." Mu Fengchen said indifferently. That supreme treasure did indeed fall into his hands, but that supreme treasure suddenly disappeared later on. If I'm not mistaken, that treasure should still be with Yi Xian. Yi Lan was cold. He smiled. "Do you think we're 3 years old? How could you come up with such a lowly lie?" Mu Fengchen looked at Yi Lan. "If you don't believe me, you can ask Yi Xian to come out and search him. Then you'll know if I'm telling the truth." Yi Lan sneered without saying a word. Yuelao also shook his head and smiled. "Mu Fengchen, you just want Yi Xian to come out, right?" Mu Fengchen stared straight at Yuelao. "If you search him, you'll know that I—" Yuelao suddenly interrupted Mu Fengchen. "It's just as Yi Lan said. Your sword sect is really full of people who like to play tricks." Mu Fengchen narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Yuelao said calmly. "I've already searched him. However, that treasure wasn't there." Hearing this, Mu Fengchen furrowed his brows. Moments later he sneered. Well done, Yi Xian, you're really good. As he said this, he looked at Yue Lao. Since you don't believe me, then show me what you've got. My sword sect will take it. With that, he turned and disappeared into the horizon. After Mu Fengchen left, Yi Xian walked out. Yue Lao looked at Yi Xian. 10,000 Laws Realm? Yi Xian nodded. I've just broken through. Yue Lao nodded slightly. I'm afraid that the sword sect hates you to death now. You better not be too high profile. Otherwise, if you're caught by that Mu Fengchen, you won't have any chance of survival. Mu Fengchen. Yi Xian nodded. Although he had already broken through, he was very clear that if he were to go up against experts like Mu Fengchen and Yue Lao, he still had no chance of winning. Yue Lao looked in the direction of the sword sect and said softly, Now it seems that the sword sect really wants to swallow that treasure without a care. Yi Lan said coldly, I'm just afraid that their appetite will be small, and they won't be able to swallow it. Yue Lao shook his head. This sword sect is not ordinary. We cannot underestimate them. Yi Xian looked at Yue Lao. What other trump cards does this sword sect have? Yue Lao nodded. They naturally have trump cards to be able to pass down their legacy for so many years. Rumor has it that back then, the founder of the sword sect left behind a clone in the sword sect. This clone, how strong is it? Yi Xian asked. Yue Lao shook his head. I don't know its strength, but it's definitely not weak. Those kind of people are all peerless geniuses. Even if it's a clone, it should be extremely strong. Other than that, within the sword sect, there is also a sword formation that he left behind. Rumor has it that this sword formation has extremely strong killing power. Even experts above the Dao realm can be easily killed by it. Even if it's exaggerated, it's definitely not weak. Saying that, he paused slightly and continued. Other than the clone of the sword sect founder and the sword formation, the sword sect has passed down and developed for so many years. They definitely have some other trump cards. Otherwise, they wouldn't have existed for so many years. Yi Xian hurriedly asked. Then what about us? Yue Lao glanced at Yi Xian and smiled. If we don't have the strength, how would we dare to covet that treasure? Yi Xian nodded. Senior, when do we launch an attack on the sword sect? Yue Lao said softly. There's no rush for now. Yi Xian said. They have already obtained that treasure. If we let them subdue that treasure, the situation will be extremely disadvantageous to us. Yue Lao was silent for a moment and said, Wait. Yi Xian asked. Wait for what? Yue Lao said softly. Wait for reinforcements. Wait for helpers. Saying that, he turned his head and looked towards the end of the horizon. They should be arriving soon. P.S. Sorry for the late update. Don't find excuses. Just say something. Don't eat rice dumplings randomly. I'm going to collapse soon. There were still 2 more chapters to go. Chapter 539. Reinforcements. Yi Xian knew that this Yue Lao and the others must have called for reinforcements. However, it was normal. With their current lineup, they definitely couldn't wipe out the sword sect. Collecting his thoughts, Yi Xian said, Seniors, I have some matters to attend to. If there's anything, I will contact you. Yue Lao looked at Yi Xian. Be careful, don't let Mu Fengchen find you. Saying this, he hesitated for a moment, then flicked his finger, and a talisman appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian was puzzled. This is? Yue Lao said. This is a space talisman. If you encounter any danger, just crush this talisman, and I will appear instantly. Yi Xian was stunned, then hurriedly said, Thank you. Needless to say, this surprised him. Yue Lao nodded slightly. Go. Yi Xian cupped his fists, then turned and left. After Yi Xian left, Yi Lan suddenly said, Yue Lao, are you trying to recruit this person? Yue Lao said softly. This person is extremely talented and arrogant. He won't be willing to serve others. Moreover, we need to be wary of this person. Yi Lan was puzzled. Then Yue Lao. Yue Lao said softly, We can use him. Use him. Yi Lan understood. Yi Xian's talent was too high and his combat power was strong. This kind of person would definitely not be willing to serve them. Moreover, that treasure was Yi Xian's. If they obtained it, at that time, Yi Xian would inevitably have other thoughts. And now, their relationship with Yi Xian was to use him. Both parties were working together and using each other. Yuelao suddenly said, "Before they arrive, don't act on your own." Having said that, he turned and disappeared. Wuyuan. After Yi Xian arrived at Wuyuan, he secretly found Enlancio, Lian Wanli and Emosia. In the courtyard, the four of them sat around a table. Emosia looked at Yi Xian. "Brother Yi, you said that they are going to attack the sword sect?" Yi Xian nodded. "They are waiting for someone. Once that person arrives, they will definitely start a war with the sword sect." When he spoke up to hear, he paused slightly and continued. "But in my opinion, the sword sect seems to have something to rely on. So, I'm afraid the matter isn't that simple." Emosia nodded. Wuyuan is also preparing to take action against the sword sect, but the dean has some concerns now. Yi Xian nodded. "I came to you this time because I hope that you'll be careful. The former sect leader of the sword sect, Mu Fengchen, is very powerful. You must not fight him recklessly." What he was most worried about now was that the sword sect would target Lian Wanli and the other two. And Lancio looked at Yi Xian. "What about you? What's your plan?" Yi Xian said solemnly, "Annihilate the sword sect." Annihilate the sword sect. This was his current plan. Because the sword sect's Yu Fengchen and Li Xianfeng were the only two people who knew that the World Prison Pagoda was still in his hands, they would definitely not let him go. If he didn't annihilate them, they would annihilate him. Emosia suddenly said, "Brother Yi, if there's anything you need, let me know at any time." Yi Xian smiled. "Definitely." Emosia nodded. "You guys chat. I'm going to cultivate." After speaking, he turned around and left. After Emosia left, Lian Wanli suddenly said, "I'll go inform little Nine and the rest." After speaking, she also turned around and left. However, when she reached the courtyard's entrance, she suddenly stopped and turned around to look at Enlancio and Yi Xian. "I'm leaving. You won't do anything special, right?" "Yi Xian." Lian Wanli laughed heartily and turned to leave. Yi Xian shook his head. "This woman." Enlancio suddenly said, "Let's go." Yi Xian nodded. The two of them walked towards the back mountains of Wuyuan. Yi Xian didn't conceal himself. Now that Wuyuan and the sword sect were at odds, he didn't believe that the sword sect would go crazy and come to Wuyuan to deal with him. Enlancio suddenly said softly, "Do you still remember Qingzhou?" Yi Xian nodded. Of course he remembered. Not only did he remember Qingzhou, he also remembered Qingcheng. He still remembered the Yi family. He still remembered the state of Jiang. And naturally, he still remembered Enlancio, who was dressed in snow-white clothes. At that time, Enlancio was still in Guosher. And he was still that youth who was filled with uncertainty about his future. Enlancio's jade-like hand lightly brushed her hair behind her ear and said softly, "We're all changing." Yi Xian smiled. "It should be said that we're becoming mature." Enlancio stopped in her tracks. She looked at Yi Xian. "At that time, I liked how passionate you were. I liked that drive you had." Yi Xian asked, "And now?" Enlancio was silent. Yi Xian said with a smile, "Have I changed?" Enlancio shook her head. "It's because this world is too complicated." "The world is too complicated." Yi Xian shook his head instead. "This world isn't complicated. What's complicated is the human heart." As he spoke, he looked at Enlancio. "In my heart, you'll always be that Enlancio who was dressed in snow-white clothes." Enlancio said softly, "At Qingzhou, at that time, you would fight for your country. In your heart, not only did you have small feelings, you also had great feelings." Yi Xian smiled. "Is there no more now?" Enlancio nodded. Yi Xian said softly, "Little An, do you think I've become selfish?" Enlancio shook her head. "I just feel that many things seem to have changed." Yi Xian looked straight at Enlancio. "I've never felt that I'm a good person, but I don't feel that I'm bad either. If the current me disappoints you, then I'm very sorry. But I won't change. Because this is me, I'm me." As he finished speaking, he turned and left. Enlancio stood silently on the spot and didn't speak for a long time. At this moment, Lian Wanli appeared before Enlancio. Enlancio said softly, "Is he angry?" Lian Wanli asked. Do you care if he's angry? And Lan Xiu nodded. Lian Wanli said, it's not that you don't like the current him. You're afraid that he'll change into a person that you won't recognize. And Lan Xiu nodded. Lian Wanli asked again, then where do you think he's changed? And Lan Xiu said softly, I can't put my finger on it. I just feel that he's slightly different. Lian Wanli shook his head. As he said, you've all become mature. Ask yourself, do you hate the current him? And Lan Xiu shook her head. Lian Wanli smiled. Let me ask you. When he was in Azure City, he guarded the kingdom of Jiang. When he was in Blue Sword Sect, did he guard the Blue Sword Sect? And Lan Xiu nodded. Lian Wanli asked again. When he was in the Neverending Starfield, did he fight for the Neverending Starfield? And Lan Xiu nodded again. Lian Wanli said softly, he hasn't changed. Whoever treats him well, he'll treat them well. Whoever treats him badly, he'll treat them badly. At this point she suddenly laughed. And Lan Xiu looked at Lian Wanli. What are you laughing at? Lian Wanli laughed. I'm happy. Because I understand him better than you. Haha. With that, she turned and left. And Lan Xiu stood quietly on the spot, silent for a long time. Wu Wen and He Liantian watched in Lan Xiu in secret. He Liantian was about to go over, when Wu Wen suddenly shook his head. Let her think about it herself. He Liantian looked at Wu Wen. Wu Wen said softly, love is the greatest obstacle of the martial path. Of course, it's also the greatest help. Whether it's hell or paradise, it's all up to her. He Liantian said in a low voice. Those two girls seem to be interested in that kid. That's not a good thing. Wu Wen said softly. It's indeed not a good thing. At this point he said softly. I hope she severs her love with a single thought, and only has the martial path in her heart. Then, our Wu Yuan might have another martial god in a few decades. Martial god. He Liantian's expression suddenly turned solemn. After the founding master of Wu Yuan, there hadn't been another martial god in Wu Yuan. He Liantian looked at Lan Xiu and said softly, I hope so. Wu Wen slowly clenched his right hand and said softly, if there's a need, the old man can only interfere. He Liantian looked at Wu Wen in shock. Master wants to forcefully interfere? Wu Wen didn't say anything. He only looked quietly at Lan Xiu in the distance. After Yi Xian left Wu Yuan, he was in a rather vexed mood. The sixth person suddenly said, angry? Yi Xian nodded. A little. The sixth person said softly, what are you angry about? You should be happy. Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. The sixth person said, she's not doubting you, but she's worried about you. Do you know what's the most difficult between martial Dao and sword Dao? Yi Xian shook his head. The sixth person said, stick to your original heart and never change. Yi Xian fell silent. The sixth person said again, when I observed that little girl just now, she seems to have reached a bottleneck in the state of mind. If she comprehends it, and resolves her martial Dao heart, her strength will definitely improve by leaps and bounds. And you should be her biggest obstacle. Yi Xian frowned slightly. What do you mean, senior? The sixth person said. What I mean is that there are two paths in front of her. The first is to sever her emotions, completely sever all her thoughts about you. At that time, whether you're good or bad, human or ghost, it will have nothing to do with her. At that time, there's only martial Dao in her heart. The second path is to make love. She must understand her heart and strengthen her feelings for you. She will use love to enter martial Dao, and martial Dao from martial Dao. At that time, you might be the foundation of her martial Dao. Your position in her heart might even be higher than martial Dao. Yi Xian said solemnly, Senior, which path do you think she will choose? The first one. The sixth person said. Is there even a need to think about it? Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? The sixth person said. Because of your attitude just now. Yi Xian smiled sheepishly. My attitude wasn't that bad, was it? The sixth person said softly. Kid, you better go find her. Otherwise, you might lose her forever. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? The sixth person said. Once she chooses to sever her emotions and resolves her martial Dao heart, you'll be no different from a stranger to her. And that Wu Yuan will definitely want her to sever her emotions. Who knows? He might use some methods to force her to sever her emotions at a critical moment. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression darkened. In the next moment, Yi Xian turned around and headed straight for Wu Yuan. Soon, Yi Xian returned to Wu Yuan. However, before he could get close to Enlancio, he was blocked by Wu Wen and He Liantian. Wu Wen looked at Yi Xian and said, "Leave." Yi Xian was expressionless. "Seniors, please step aside." Wu Wen's eyes narrowed slightly. "Leave." Yi Xian suddenly roared angrily, "Scram." As soon as he said that, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body. Dragon soul. Dragon power. Emoka power. Not only that, but now that he was exposed, all the blood in his body started to boil. A blood-red aura directly forced Wu Wen and He Liantian back several feet. The sixth person's voice suddenly sounded. "This bloodline. P.S. There's one more chapter." Chapter 540. In front of Yi Xian, Wu Wen and the other man's eyes were filled with disbelief. The energy that had erupted from Yi Xian's body had actually pushed them back. Push back. Wu Wen stared fixedly at Yi Xian with shock in his heart. Is that the power of bloodline? In front of them, Yi Xian's body was trembling violently, and his smoke puppet was actually gradually turning blood red. Right at this moment, the World Prism Pagoda within Yi Xian's body suddenly trembled. In the next moment, a mysterious force enveloped Yi Xian. Gradually, the blood in Yi Xian's body calmed down. Yi Xian's pupils gradually returned to normal as well. A short while later, Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Senior, what happened to me just now?" The sixth person asked, "What does your father do?" Yi Xian was slightly stunned, and then he said, "Why do you ask?" The sixth person said, "Nothing, I'm just asking." "Yi Xian," the sixth person said, "that was the power of your bloodline just now, and it's already been suppressed by this lousy pagoda." Suppressed by the World Prism Pagoda? Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. Why is it suppressing my bloodline? Is it afraid that something will happen to me? The sixth person said, "It's afraid that something will happen to you. Your bloodline is extraordinary, and it might be in danger if it awakens. So it directly suppressed it." Yi Xian fell silent. Bloodline? He didn't even know what the hell his bloodline was. All he knew was that he'd been the one who'd devoured that godly king's blood. Was his bloodline very powerful? Yi Xian shook his head and stopped thinking about this question. He paid no attention to Wu Wen and the other man, and he charged directly towards Enlancio, who was nearby. He Liantian was just about to stop him when Wu Wen shook his head. "Let him go." He Liantian looked at Wu Wen, and the latter said softly, "If he intentionally stops her, the losses might outweigh the gains. Let her make her own choice." He Liantian nodded. Not far away, Yi Xian rushed in front of Enlancio. Enlancio's eyes were tightly shut. She just stood there, not moving at all. Yi Xian whispered, "Shaowen?" There was no response. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "Senior, what should we do?" The sixth replied, "I don't know." Yi Xian was speechless. She's in a meditative state right now, but she can still hear what you're saying. Tell her not to sever her emotions. If she does, you'll find that she's no longer the person you know. Cut off all emotional ties. Yi Xian gazed at Enlancio, took a deep breath and said, I had thoughts about you as soon as I laid eyes on you. Oh no, it was a favorable impression. From the first time I saw you, I had a good impression of you. I don't know when it started, but someone else appeared in the depths of my heart. That person is you. After you left, I would miss you at least 3 times a day. That feeling was like a demon rat missing its rice. Day and night, every moment was torture. On the other side, Wu Wen shook his head. The old man can't take it anymore. With that, he turned around and left. He Liantian. Not far away, Yi Xian continued. Just now, someone told me that I might lose you forever. Do you know how I felt? Panic. For the first time I panicked. If I lose you, what's the point of the sword Dao? What was the point of life? Life shouldn't just be about the way of the sword. I still want to have you. Not far away, He Liantian shook his head. Youngsters these days. After saying that, he turned around and left. Yi Xian still wanted to say something, but Enlancio suddenly opened her eyes, and there was a faint blush on her face. Yi Xian was stunned. He hurriedly said, Shaoan. However, Enlancio shook her head and left. Just as Yi Xian was about to chase after her, the sixth person suddenly said, You might be shameless, but she is. Yi Xian was confused. What do you mean, senior? The sixth person said, Sometimes you seem quite smart, but why are you so stupid at other times? Yi Xian. The sixth person said, Let's go. Yi Xian said in a low voice, I haven't told her clearly yet. The sixth person said, What else is there to say? She didn't kill you, which proves that she didn't choose to give up on you. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then asked, Then why did she run? The sixth person said, Because you're too shameless. Yi Xian. At this moment, Wu Wen suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Wu Wen sized up Yi Xian. My Wu Yuan won't stop UNN. But now, I hope that you can temporarily put aside your personal feelings. After all, you should be very clear about your current situation. Yi Xian said with a smile. Senior, are you afraid that I'll drag her down and implicate Wu Yuan? Wu Wen shook his head. I'm not afraid that you'll implicate Wu Yuan. I'm afraid that you'll drag her to death. Yi Xian fell silent. Wu Wen still wanted to say something, but Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior, what's your Wu Yuan's attitude toward the sword sect? Wu Wen looked at Yi Xian. What are you trying to say? Yi Xian said with a smile. If I'm not wrong, your Wu Yuan actually has killing intent toward the sword sect, but you're waiting for an opportunity. If that's the case, then we have a common goal, don't you think? Wu Wen looked at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Yi Xian continued, I'm very grateful to Wu Yuan for taking in my younger sister, and the others. No, the word taking in isn't appropriate, because Senior is very clear that it's not a loss for Wu Yuan to have them join. If Senior feels that I'll implicate them and implicate Wu Yuan, I can bring them away. I believe that there are still many forces that are willing to take them in. Wu Wen looked straight at Yi Xian. We only hope that you can leave, Yi Xian said with a smile. No matter who it is, they won't be able to separate me from my younger sister, and the others. Wu Wen shook his head. You're very selfish, Yi Xian said with a smile. I understand Senior's meaning. You hope that they'll cut off their relationship with me and stay in Wu Yuan peacefully, right? Wu Wen nodded. That's what I mean. Yi Xian asked, Does Senior think that's possible? Wu Wen shook his head. Yi Xian, you're very monstrous, and your accomplishments in the future will surely be extraordinary. The old man shouldn't have a problem with them befriending you, but intuition tells the old man that you're not simple, and it should be said that you're very complicated. There are too many mysteries and uncertainties about you. Just like that pagoda. It's not normal for such a precious treasure to be in your possession. The old man is afraid that you'll bring them into a huge whirlpool. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, and then he said, Don't worry, Senior. I hope that they're safe and sound more than Wu Yuan. With that he turned and left. Wu Wen sighed softly on the spot. He wanted to make Yi Xian leave, and he even wanted to use force. But he didn't choose to do so in the end, because Yi Xian had a deep relationship with his younger sister, and the others. If he did so, it was extremely likely that these little fellows would betray Wu Yuan. After a short moment, Wu Wen sighed softly once more, and then he turned and left. There was another reason why he'd given up, and it was because Yi Xian was sufficiently monstrous. Even though it might implicate and the others. But if Yi Xian didn't die and was allowed to grow in the future, then Wu Yuan would be equivalent to having an extraordinary swordsman as external aid. After he saw Yi Xian and the others fight Dao realm experts, he knew that the future belonged to these young people. So Enlancio and the others befriending Yi Xian was beneficial and detrimental to Wu Yuan. After Yi Xian left Wu Yuan, he'd secretly found Baiji. Gigi. In a room. Baiji suddenly gazed at a nearby corner, and then she pondered deeply for a moment before she lowered her head and continued reading the scroll before her. Baiji sent a voice transmission. The last time you asked me to find her was at the sword sect, and I don't know where she went after that. Yi Xian frowned slightly. The sword sect. Baiji nodded lightly. She didn't enter the sword sect, and she just stayed outside the sword sect for a while. After that, there was no news of her at all. Yi Xian fell silent for a short moment before he said, "There's no news at all." Baiji nodded. "That's very unusual, because with her strength, it's probably impossible for her to suddenly vanish." Yi Xian fell silent. Why are my mother and father so mysterious? He didn't hate his father who he'd never met, because his younger sister was fine. So he didn't hate anyone. Of course he didn't really care. In any case, he and his younger sister had been relying on each other for so many years, so it didn't matter to him whether he had a father or not. So long as his younger sister was fine, then Yi Xian's world was beautiful. Baiji continued, "Are they going to act against the sword sect?" Yi Xian nodded. "They should be." Baiji spoke in a solemn voice. "You have to be careful. As far as I know, the sword sect isn't simple, and they haven't revealed their true trump card. Moreover, the sword sect has been passed down for so many years, and some of the older swordsmen might be there. They might not care about the sword sect at ordinary times, but if the sword sect has the power to annihilate the sword sect, they will definitely take action." Yi Xian nodded. "They're in charge of the frontal attack, and I'm in charge of sneak attacks. If I can't win, I'll flee." Baiji shook her head and smiled. "You." At this point, she seemed to have thought of something and said seriously, "There's one more thing. The previous sect master of the sword sect, Mu Fengchen, has left the sword sect, and we don't know where he went." "Sword Saint?" Yi Xian frowned slightly. "He left the sword sect." Baiji nodded. "In short, the sword sect has been passed down for so many years. No one knows how deep their foundation is except for themselves." Yi Xian said, "I'll be careful. You too." After saying that, he turned around and disappeared. Baiji softly said, "I wish you all the best." Yi Xian came to the outskirts of Shenwu City. He quietly hid in the dark. What he needed to do now was to wait. Wait for Yuelao's reinforcements to arrive. On the branch, Yi Xian seemed to have thought of something. He opened his left hand, and a sheathed sword appeared in his palm. Looking at the sword before him, Yi Xian frowned. He was quite curious about this sword. What kind of sword was it? He hesitated for a moment, and then tried to pull it, but the sword still didn't move. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Just as he was about to put it away, he seemed to have thought of something, and directly returned to the prison pagoda. He came before Xiaolinger, and handed the sword in his hand to Xiaolinger. "Try pulling it." Xiaolinger blinked, and then she took the sword. Then she gently pulled it. Buzz! A sword's hum suddenly resounded in the prison pagoda. The next moment, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. He directly left the prison pagoda. At this moment, a black cloud appeared above his head. Within the black cloud, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. At the same time, a powerful force of heaven and earth enveloped him. Yi Xian was speechless. P.S. I wish everyone a happy Dragon Boat Festival. I also wish all the college entrance examination students can get into the school of their dreams. Of course, I also hope that everyone can get into Tsinghua University. That way, we will be alumni. Today, the book review section will draw another 5 readers to send physical books. I will record the results of yesterday's draw and publish it on the book review section and public account. It will all be free. Chapter 541. Stop! At this time, the voice of the 6th floor came from the pagoda. Xiaolinger blinked, unable to react. The 6th floor said again, "Little guy, stop!" Xiaolinger looked up, blinking. "Are you talking to me?" The 6th floor said, "Yes, stop." Xiaolinger was confused. "Stop what?" The 6th floor. At this time, Xiaolinger looked at the sword in her hand. It was trembling violently, and there were cracks on the scabbard. Xiaolinger panicked. It seems to be coming out." The 6th floor said. "Then why don't you put it back?" Hearing this, Xiaolinger quickly put the sword back into the scabbard. The sword immediately calmed down. Outside the pagoda, in the void, lightning danced in the black clouds like silver snakes, lingering for a long time. Yi Xian's expression was extremely solemn. Danger. At that moment he had truly felt danger. If the lightning had fallen, he felt that he would have been burnt to ashes. When Yi Xian returned to the pagoda, Xiaolinger quickly handed the sword to Yi Xian. Her face was still pale. Yi Xian gently rubbed Xiaolinger's head, then looked up. Senior, this sword. The sixth floor said. This sword's killing intent is too heavy. It's not something you can control right now. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. What sword is this? The sixth floor said. I don't know, but from the sword's aura, it's not a good sword. You can't control it right now. Yi Xian looked at the sword in his hand, and said softly. The sword sect should know where this sword came from. Xiaolinger suddenly pointed upstairs and said, seventh floor, I want to go. Seventh floor. Yi Xian collected his thoughts, looked at Xiaolinger. You want to go to the seventh floor? Xiaolinger nodded. Yi Xian was curious. Why are you going to the seventh floor? Xiaolinger blinked. Baby. Seventh floor, baby? Yi Xian asked, Senior, do you know what's on the seventh floor? The sixth replied, I don't know. Yi Xian looked at Xiaolinger. How did you know there were treasures on the seventh floor? Xiaolinger blinked and said nothing. Yi Xian smiled and said, You can't tell me either? Xiaolinger lowered her head slightly. I can't say it. She asked me to keep it a secret. Her? Yi Xian frowned. Who is she? Xiaolinger shook her head. This is our little secret. Yi Xian smiled. All right, I won't ask anymore. But I can't enter the seventh floor. The seventh floor. Without the Tao law, he could only sense the presence of the seventh floor, but he couldn't enter it. Xiaolinger looked at Yi Xian and asked, Can I use my sword to split it open? Yi Xian's expression froze. The sixth floor suddenly said, Some of this little girl's ideas are very dangerous. You better take precautions. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Little girl, don't be reckless. Understand? Xiaolinger pouted. All right. Just when Yi Xian was about to speak, he frowned slightly. Soon he left the World Prism Pagoda. As soon as he left the pagoda, a voice rang out in front of him. Come to the martial courtyard. Lian Wanli's voice. Yi Xian didn't ask why and directly disappeared. Wu Yuan. In a courtyard, Yi Xian found Lian Wanli. Lian Wanli said in a deep voice. Shaoan is about to break through. Break through? Yi Xian asked. Creation realm? Lian Wanli looked straight at Yi Xian. It's the Tao realm. Tao realm. Yi Xian was shocked. Tao realm? How is that possible? One had to know that Enlanxia was only in the Sage realm previously. At this moment, Wu Wen suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. He glanced at Yi Xian and said, She entered martial arts through emotions, and entered the Taoism through martial arts. Her state of mind was clear, and on top of that, she used to have an excellent foundation. Therefore, she entered the creation realm directly. Yi Xian frowned. Entering the creation realm. Then she immediately broke through to the Tao realm? Wu Wen shook his head. If that's all, then it's naturally great. However, her bloodline has awakened. Bloodline awakened? Yi Xian was stunned. Then he asked, What bloodline? Wu Wen was silent. Just as Yi Xian was about to continue asking, Wu Wen said, In short, she is like an arrow on a bowstring. She has no choice but to release it. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. She is about to enter the Tao from the martial Tao. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Entering the Tao from the martial Tao. Is that the Tao realm? Wu Wen nodded. The Tao realm is also known as the Tao initiation realm. I asked them to call you here, because I hope that you can help protect her in secret. Yi Xian looked at Wu Wen. Senior, are you saying that the sword sect might come to cause trouble? Wu Wen nodded. It's not a possibility, it's 100%. That girl is a heavenly genius. Once she enters the Tao realm, ordinary Tao realm experts will not be her match. The sword sect will definitely not sit by and watch her enter the Tao. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Can you suppress it? Wu Wen shook his head. No. She must break through now. If she forcefully suppresses it, it will ruin things. Because we cannot suppress the power of her bloodline, nor do we dare to suppress it. Moreover, the awakening of her bloodline is also an opportunity for her. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian asked, What do you want me to do? Wu Wen looked at Yi Xian. You help her in secret. Don't let anyone approach her. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Senior, do you have confidence? Wu Wen shook his head. If all the experts of the sword sect gather together to deal with her, I have no confidence. As he spoke up to hear, his face turned bitter. This girl really broke through at the wrong time. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. I want to see her. Wu Wen nodded. Follow me. As he spoke, he brought Yi Xian and Mo Xie to the back mountains of Wuyuan. At the peak of the back mountains, Enlancio stood quietly. Her clothes were as white as snow, untainted by a speck of dust. Yi Xian walked behind Enlancio. Enlancio said in a soft voice, You've come. Yi Xian nodded. He was just about to speak when Enlancio suddenly said, Don't speak. Yi Xian was speechless. Enlancio looked towards the distant horizon and said in a light voice, Did you mean what you said to me earlier? Yi Xian was stunned, and then he said, Of course. Enlancio nodded. I broke through. As soon as she finished speaking, she slowly closed her eyes. Yi Xian glanced at Enlancio. With me here, no one can disturb you. As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished silently. Following Yi Xian's retreat, all the powerhouses of the martial academy came out. Numerous formidable auras suddenly appeared in the surroundings of the martial academy. Not only that, there was a golden bell the size of a palm above Enlancio's head. The golden bell emanated a ray of golden light that enveloped Enlancio. Besides the golden bell, there were 4 golden flags that were over 3 m long around Enlancio. The 4 flags directly locked down the space around Enlancio. At this moment, the space around Enlancio was impregnable, and even a Dao realm expert wouldn't be able to travel through space to arrive in front of Enlancio. Moreover, there were numerous golden threads in the space around Enlancio, and these threads formed a dense mass that locked down the space around her. If one looked carefully, one would notice that these golden threads were covered in mysterious talisman markings. These runes were drawn with mysterious runes, and the energy emitted by these runes was like a net that covered the entire space around Enlancio. A creation realm treasure. No matter if it was the golden bell, the flags, or the golden threads, all of them were creation realm treasures. On the other hand, an old man stood atop the golden bell. This person was Wu Wen, the strongest expert in Wuyuan right now. This time, for the sake of Enlancio's advancement, Wuyuan could be said to have mobilized all its experts. Such a young Dao realm expert, and one that was extremely likely to attain divinity in the martial Dao, was worthy of Wuyuan doing this. After Yi Xian left the sword sect, he directly went out of the city and found Yuelao and the rest. Yuelao looked at Yi Xian in front of him. You want us to protect that little girl from Wuyuan? Yi Xian shook his head. Yuelao's eyes flashed with astonishment. Then you? Yi Xian looked at Yuelao. This is our chance. The sword sect will definitely make a move against that genius from Wuyuan. And when they make a move, it's our chance. Yuelao said, It's indeed our chance. Speaking up to hear, he looked at Yi Xian. Then when do you think is suitable for us to make a move? After a moment of silence, Yi Xian said, After the sword sect makes a move. Yuelao smiled. Do you think that the sword sect has a chance to stop that little girl? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Yuelao smiled. I will wait. Wait for them to stop that girl. If they stop that girl, Wuyuan will definitely take revenge on the sword sect. At that time, we can sit on top of the mountain and watch the tigers fight. If they can't stop that girl, it means that Wuyuan will resist them madly, and we can wait until both sides are injured. Yi Xian nodded slightly. This junior understands. After saying that, he turned and left. He knew that it was impossible for these people to protect Enlancio together. These people will make a move, but they will wait until both Wuyuan and the sword sect are injured before making a move. Protecting Enlancio, this matter still depended on him. After Yi Xian left, Yi Lan, who was beside Yuelao, suddenly said, The sword sect should know that we are in the dark. Do you think they will make a move? Yuelao said softly, They will definitely make a move. Yi Lan looked at Yuelao puzzled. Why? Yuelao said, The fight for the next generation. If no one in the sword sect can stop that girl, then they must eliminate her. Otherwise, the next generation of the sword sect will be crushed by that girl. Especially now, the sword sect and Wu Yuan are like fire and water. Under these circumstances, if they don't make a move, what awaits them in the future is a slow death. So they will definitely make a move, because this is the best chance for them to make a move. Yilan said in a low voice. If they know that we are in the dark, will they do the same? Yuelao said softly. If they make a move, it means that they are not worried about us at all. If they don't make a move, it proves that their foundation is not as deep as we think. When that time comes, we will immediately make a move. I believe that those from the sword sect should be able to think of this as well. If we make a move, Wu Yuan will wait for that girl to break through and reap the benefits. Our goal is that treasure, not to destroy the sword sect. However, if Wu Yuan makes a move, they will definitely exterminate the sword sect. If you were the sect leader of the sword sect, what would you choose? Yilan looked in the direction of the sword sect. From what I can see, whether they make a move or not, their situation is not good. Yuelao said. It depends on how powerful their trump card is. If their trump card is powerful enough, they will definitely make a move against Wu Yuan first. Since Wu Yuan is making such a big fuss, they should be aware of the sword sect's trump card. No matter what, let our men get ready. Yilang asked. Get ready to make a move? Yuelao smiled. Get ready to watch the show. Rumor has it that the sword sect's founder and Wu Yuan's founder had a close relationship in the past. If the sword sect and Wu Yuan both summon their ancestors' clone, it will definitely be very interesting. Chapter 542. Wu Yuan. At this moment, Wu Yuan was on high alert, and all the experts were out. They only had one goal, to protect Enlancio as she broke through to the Dao realm. Any force not only needed a foundation, but also fresh blood in the younger generation, because these fresh blood guaranteed the future of a sect. Enlancio was very young, and once she stepped into the Dao realm, she would be the youngest monster in Wu Yuan's history to do so. Most importantly, Enlancio's combat power was extremely strong. Once she stepped into the Dao realm, many of the older generation Dao realm experts would not be her match. There were many monsters in Wu Yuan, and at this moment, Enlancio was the most dazzling one. For Wu Yuan, Enlancio must be protected. For Sword Sect, if they did not stop her, then in the future, if no super monster appeared in Sword Sect, the younger generation of Sword Sect would be suppressed for the rest of their lives. Especially at this moment, when they and Wu Yuan were like fire and water. The entire martial institution was on guard, but the Sword Sect was incomparably calm and didn't move at all. Yi Xian came to Tongbao Chamber of Commerce. In a room, Yi Xian sat in front of Baiji. Baiji said softly, "Right now Sword Sect is very calm. The calmer it is, the more abnormal it is." Yi Xian said solemnly, "Once they make a move, it will be a fatal blow." Baiji nodded. If more than 10 Dao realm experts recklessly target Missen, Wu Yuan will not be able to stop them. Yi Xian's face was gloomy. A moment later he got up and left. Baiji looked at Yi Xian. "Brother Yi." Yi Xian turned to look at Baiji, and Baiji turned her head. In the darkness, 2 old men walked out. Both of them were Dao realm experts. Baiji said softly, "Old Lin, Old Xiao, go with young Master Yi." Both of them hesitated, and Old Lin said solemnly, "Girl, your safety." Baiji smiled and said, "They won't target me now, go with him." The 2 of them looked at each other and nodded. Yi Xian said softly, "Miss Baiji." Baiji interrupted Yi Xian's words. "Don't say any more. Right now both you and Missen need manpower." Yi Xian nodded. "Thank you." As soon as he finished speaking, he left with Elder Lin and Elder Xiao. In the room, Baiji said softly, "Sword Sect. How big is your trump card?" Wu Yuan. When Yi Xian returned to Wu Yuan, he did not show himself. Instead, he hid in the dark. His greatest threat to the Sword Sect was hidden in the dark. In the dark, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. He wasn't far from Enlancio, about 100 feet away. Looking at Enlancio in the distance, Yi Xian suddenly frowned. The sword sect knew that Wu Yuan was protecting Enlancio. If they targeted Enlancio, even if they succeeded, they would have to pay a heavy price. Under such circumstances, thinking of this, Yi Xian frowned deeply. A moment later, Yi Xian entered the Prism Pagoda and found Xiaolinger. At this moment, the little girl was watering her spirit fruits. Yi Xian was also a little surprised because the inside of the Prism Pagoda was basically filled with spirit trees by this little girl. From the first to the fifth floor, they were all occupied by her. Yi Xian shook his head speechlessly. Did this little girl want to fill the entire Prism Pagoda? At this time, Xiaolinger suddenly looked at Yi Xian and said in a crisp voice, "When do we leave the 6th floor? I'm running out of places to plant them." Yi Xian. Haha. A voice suddenly sounded from the 6th floor. Does this little girl want to drive me away? Yi Xian also didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He squatted in front of Yi Ling and said seriously, "Xiaolinger, big brother needs your help with something, can you?" Xiaolinger blinked. "Okay." Yi Xian pointed to the top of the pagoda. "Go get a sword and come down." Xiaolinger didn't think much of it. She directly went to the top of the pagoda and came down with the sword. She came in front of Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian leaned over and whispered a few words in her ear. A moment later, Xiaolinger blinked. "Can I beat it?" Yi Xian said seriously. "You can." Xiaolinger asked again, "Really?" Yi Xian nodded. "Really? But I'm a little nervous." Yi Xian. After a while, Yi Xian calmed the little girl down. Then, Xiaolinger carried the sword and left the Prism Pagoda. After Xiaolinger left, Yi Xian was silent for a moment. Then he looked at the wooden figure on the right. This wooden man wielding a long sword. Yi Xian walked in front of the wooden figure and gave it a sword of the manifestation realm. Then the wooden figure also left the Prism Pagoda. Yi Xian came to the 2nd floor. The 2nd floor was where the Emperor Dog lived. The Emperor Dog looked at Yi Xian. "I understand." After saying that, it also left the Prism Pagoda. Yi Xian also left the Prism Pagoda. He looked at Enlancio in the distance. What he needed to do now was to wait. Wu Yuan was also waiting. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. In the blink of an eye, it was night time. Enlancio's aura was calm, and there was no movement. As for the sword sect, they did not appear either. The experts of Wu Yuan were also checking on the sword sect. As long as the sword sect made a move, Wu Yuan would know immediately. 2 days passed. On the back mountain of Wu Yuan, there was still no movement from Enlancio. And in these 2 days, there was no movement from the sword sect. The entire sword sect was dead silent. On the 3rd day, Enlancio, who was on the mountain peak, suddenly stretched out her hands. She raised her head slightly and faced the sky. Around her, a faint red glow quietly appeared. The smell of bloodline. In the air, Wu Yuan looked at Enlancio with a calm expression. However, his divine sense had already covered the entire Wu Yuan. If a fly entered, he would be able to notice it. In the dark, Yi Xian's expression also turned solemn. He knew that Enlancio was about to break through. Once she broke through, she would be able to step into the Dao realm. Once she entered the Dao realm, Enlancio's strength would definitely undergo a qualitative change. Moreover, Wu Yuan would possess the youngest Dao realm genius in history. Of course, besides the founding ancestor of Wu Yuan. After all, no one knew what sort of existence the founding ancestor of Wu Yuan was. Meanwhile, the voice from the 6th person suddenly resounded in Yi Xian's mind. That little girl's bloodline is really extraordinary. Yi Xian looked at Enlancio and asked, "Senior, exactly what sort of existence is the strength of bloodline?" He still didn't really understand the strength of bloodline. The voice from the 6th person said, "The strength of bloodline is the strength of blood. When some people attain a certain level, they're able to change their own bloodline. And this change of his will change the bloodline of his descendants as well. This bloodline is a natural advantage. For example, the reason many great powers and clans are able to be so formidable and possess so many monstrous geniuses is a huge reason. And it's the strength of bloodline. Just like this little girl before you. If she didn't possess the strength of her bloodline, then it would be impossible for her to directly enter the Tao realm. Yi Xian spoke solemnly. Then isn't possessing the strength of her bloodline equivalent to cheating? The voice from the sixth person smiled. You can say that. However, the strength of your bloodline is a limit as well. Because if you're unable to break through the shackles of your bloodline, after you've reached your limits, then it'll become a hurdle for you. A hurdle that you might never be able to overcome. Yi Xian gazed at Enlancio. Senior, is the strength of my bloodline more formidable, or is hers more formidable? The voice from the sixth person fell silent for a short moment before he said, her bloodline is comparatively normal, but yours isn't. There's no way to compare them. Yi Xian was speechless. Right at this moment, Enlancio's hands suddenly pressed down, and it didn't take long for strands of formidable aura to sweep out from within her. Moreover, countless black clouds suddenly converged in the sky above Wu Yuan, and a bolt of lightning flickered within the black clouds. Yi Xian looked up into the sky with a puzzled expression. What's that? The voice from the sixth person said. I don't know what it is. Yi Xian sent a voice transmission to Wu Wen. Senior, what's that? Wu Wen glanced at the surroundings, but he still hadn't noticed Yi Xian. He was rather shocked by Yi Xian's concealment technique. Even he was able to deceive Wu Wen. Wu Wen restrained his thoughts and said, this is the Tao tribulation. Once one steps into the Tao realm, one will experience Tao tribulation, because it represents that she's on the verge of breaking through the shackles of this world. Moreover, the moment when the Tao tribulation descends will be the moment she's in the most danger. It's not a problem for her to endure the Tao tribulation, but it's extremely dangerous for her if she's disturbed by external forces. The slightest mistake might cause her soul to be obliterated. Obliterated. Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. So, in this way, the moment the Tao tribulation descends is the best opportunity for them to make a move. Wu Wen nodded. If they don't make a move now, then they won't have the chance to. Yi Xian spoke softly. I understand. In midair, Wu Wen swept the surroundings with his gaze. Presently, the sword sect still hadn't taken any action. This caused him to feel even more uneasy in his heart, because he knew that this was the calm before the storm. Once the sword sect made a move, it would surely destroy the heavens and the earth. Wu Wen went silent for a short moment before he turned around to look at He Liantian, and he said via voice transmission, prepare for the worst. He Liantian was shocked in his heart, yet he didn't say anything, and just nodded before leaving silently. In next to no time, the might of the lightning emitted by the bolt of lightning in the sky above Enlancio grew stronger and stronger, and the entire sky darkened at this moment. Rumble! Lightning flickered within the layer of black clouds while numerous terrifying pressures swept down ceaselessly, and they pressed down to the point it was suffocating. Wu Wen's expression was extremely heavy because Enlancio's Tao tribulation was even more terrifying than the Tao tribulation he'd encountered when he broke through to the Tao realm all those years ago. The stronger the Tao tribulation, the greater the potential and strength of the person charging into the Tao realm would be. If it was at any other time, this would surely be a good thing. But now it might not be so good. Just like that, around 15 minutes later, the entire sky suddenly trembled violently, and then a bolt of lightning descended like a bolt of lightning under the gazes of countless people. At the instant this bolt of lightning descended, everyone felt a strand of formidable pressure. It was capable of destroying the heavens and the earth. Meanwhile, Enlancio opened her eyes, and then she raised her head to look up into the sky with a calm expression. Right when the bolt of lightning arrived over 100 m above Enlancio, a sword howl suddenly resounded from the northern sword sect. In the next moment, a blood-red sword shot into the sky from the sword sect, and then it shot violently towards Wu Yuan. Everywhere the blood-red sword passed, the sky was covered in blood red. P.S. I picked 10 readers in the book review section to send physical books, but only 2 of them contacted me. What about the other 8? If no one contacted me by noon, then I'll draw another one. In any case, I'll continue drawing 5 more today. Big brothers, you should take a look at the replies. After you finish reading, come back from time to time and take another look. You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.